This is not the beginning. It's the continuation of a journey that's taken us across deserts, into tombs, beneath oceans, and through lost civilizations. Over the past 10 episodes, we've uncovered 70 artifacts and ancient enigmas, each one strange, powerful, and unanswered. But now, we return, not to revisit, but to reconnect. Because the deeper we look, the more these discoveries begin to speak to one another. This isn't just a recap, it's a revelation. Hidden threads begin to weave a larger story of forgotten knowledge, vanished worlds, and civilizations whose echoes still shape our present. Whether you've followed the full path or are stepping in for the first time, what you're about to witness may change how you see the ancient world. Let's begin. On the night of March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 departed from Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 0:41 local time, bound for Beijing. The Boeing 777-200ER carried 239 passengers and crew, following a routine flight path. The weather was clear, communication was normal, and nothing suggested the flight would become one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. At 1:19, as MH370 was leaving Malaysian airspace and preparing to enter Vietnamese-controlled airspace, the co-pilot, Farik Abdul Hamid, transmitted the final known words from the cockpit: "Good night, Malaysian 370. Minutes later, the aircraft's transponder, which broadcasts its location to ground radar, was switched off. The plane then made an unexpected left turn, diverting from its scheduled path. This was the moment everything changed. Despite losing contact with civilian radar, military installations picked up an unidentified aircraft making a sharp turn westward. Later confirmed as MH370, it flew back over Malaysia, crossed the Malacca Strait, and then turned southwest, heading into the vast emptiness of the Indian Ocean. But why? There was no distress call, no sign of mechanical failure, and no communication from the pilots. It was as if the plane had deliberately disappeared. When MH370 failed to arrive in Beijing, a massive search operation began. Authorities initially focused on the South China Sea, assuming a mid-flight disaster. But as military radar data was analyzed, it became clear that MH370 had traveled far off course. The search shifted to the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote and unforgiving places on Earth. The effort became the largest and most expensive in aviation history, covering 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor. But despite years of sonar scanning, the wreckage was never found. The first real clue surfaced in 2015 when a piece of the plane, a flaperon, washed up on Reunion Island, thousands of kilometers away. It confirmed that the aircraft had ended up in the Indian Ocean, but how it got there remained a mystery. Over time, more debris appeared along the coasts of Africa, Madagascar, and nearby islands. Yet none of it provided answers to the plane's fate. Without clear evidence, theories emerged. Some believed it was a mechanical failure, but why didn't the pilot send a distress signal? A sudden decompression could have rendered everyone unconscious, leaving the plane to fly on autopilot until it ran out of fuel. Others suspected foul play. Was it a deliberate act by the pilot, Zahari Ahmad Shah, in a planned suicide mission? No conclusive proof supported this. More speculative theories suggested hijacking, cyber interference, or even military involvement. Was the plane intercepted and covered up? Did something force it off course? With so many unknowns, speculation ran wild. Despite years of advanced sonar searches, the wreckage of MH370 remains undiscovered. In 2018, a renewed private search by Ocean Infinity also ended without success. The disappearance of MH370 remains one of the most confounding aviation mysteries of all time. But it is not the only case of a plane seemingly vanishing into thin air. Hidden beneath London's modern streets lies an artifact that quietly defies historical certainty, a Roman relief portraying the enigmatic deity Mithras in the act of slaying a bull. Accidentally unearthed during post-war reconstruction in 1954, the London Mithraeum provided historians with an unexpected glimpse into Mithraism, a mysterious Roman cult flourishing between the 1st and 4th centuries CE. At its heart is the extraordinary carving known as the Tauroctony, depicting Mithras dressed in Persian attire, performing a ritual whose exact meaning remains tantalizingly uncertain. Mithraism was practiced secretly throughout the Roman Empire, primarily by soldiers and imperial officials who gathered in secluded subterranean temples to perform hidden rites. Yet despite its widespread presence from Europe and North Africa to Asia Minor, No sacred texts or definitive records survive, leaving historians reliant solely on symbolic imagery and scattered archaeological clues. The London relief, meticulously crafted, features enigmatic figures alongside Mithras: a serpent, scorpion, raven, and dog, each symbolically significant but collectively resistant to interpretation. Celestial symbols hovering above suggest astrological meanings, possibly representing cycles of rebirth or cosmic renewal. Yet certainty eludes even the most detailed scholarly analysis. Further excavations at the London Mithraeum revealed intriguing evidence of ritual feasts and symbolic sacrifices, pottery fragments, animal bones, and coins carefully arranged, but their precise significance remains unresolved. Scholars speculate widely. Was Mithraism purely astrological, a secret society emphasizing personal salvation, or a mystery cult reserved strictly for military elites? The answer remains locked behind the temple's deliberately concealed walls. The rapid disappearance of Mithraism with the rise of Christianity left its mysteries abruptly abandoned, temples forgotten, and rituals extinguished. London's Mithraeum quietly stands as testament to the fragility of historical memory, offering compelling questions but few definitive answers. It reminds us that beneath familiar streets, history often whispers enigmatically, unwilling to fully reveal its secrets. For centuries, the Hittites were little more than ghostly echoes in ancient texts. They appeared briefly in the Hebrew Bible as a people who interacted with Abraham. Egyptian inscriptions mentioned them as rivals at war and as uneasy allies in peace. But for the modern world, they were a puzzle with missing pieces. No ruins, no cities, no language, just scattered references that scholars once dismissed as either poetic invention or mistaken identity. Could an entire empire, strong enough to challenge pharaohs, really have disappeared without a trace? That question lingered until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when scattered inscriptions in an unknown script began to surface in the highlands of Anatolia. In 1834, French explorer Charles Texier stumbled upon vast ruins near Bogazkal, Turkey. Locals knew the site as Büyükil, but few realized its significance. It wasn't until 1906, under German archaeologist Hugo Winkler, that the ruins were identified as Hattusa, capital of a forgotten superpower, the Hittite Empire. What Winkler found there would reshape our understanding of the late Bronze Age. Beneath the earth lay immense stone walls, fortresses, ceremonial gates guarded by lion carvings, and the remains of a meticulously planned city. But the true treasure was buried inside its palace, over 10,000 cuneiform tablets, neatly stacked in what had once been the royal archive. Written in a newly identified language, an early branch of Indo-European, the tablets recorded royal correspondence, laws, diplomatic treaties, and even oaths to the gods. Among them was a diplomatic gem, the Treaty of Kadesh, signed between Rameses II of Egypt and the Hittite king Hattusili III, around 1259 BCE. It is the oldest known surviving peace treaty, and it reveals a truth long obscured by silence, that the Hittites were not a peripheral tribe, but one of the great powers of the ancient world. At their height, around the 14th to 13th centuries BCE, the Hittite Empire stretched across most of Anatolia and into northern Syria, commanding trade routes, waging wars with Egypt, and influencing neighboring cultures. They built roads, developed legal systems, and orchestrated complex international alliances. And then, around 1180 BCE, they were gone. No grand battle marks their end. No fiery catastrophe recorded their fall. Only the silence of empty halls and buried texts. What happened? Was it famine, rebellion, internal collapse, or the arrival of the mysterious sea peoples who upended the entire eastern Mediterranean? Or perhaps it was all of these at once, crashing down like a domino chain too vast to stop. Even now, questions remain. How could such a powerful empire vanish so completely that its existence was doubted for centuries? How many of its cities still lie hidden beneath the soil of modern Turkey and Syria? What knowledge might yet rest in the unread tablets still housed in museum archives? For all we've unearthed, fortifications, treaties, kings and gods, the Hittites remain partly obscured by the very earth that preserved them. Their story is no longer a myth, but it is far from complete. The Theopetra cave doesn't look like much at first glance. Tucked into a limestone cliff in central Greece, it overlooks the plains of Thessaly, an area long known for early human habitation. But in 2010, something was found inside that changed how we understand the human story. A low stone wall, built deliberately, was uncovered near the cave's entrance. When tested using optically stimulated luminescence, a method that measures the last time minerals were exposed to sunlight, it dated back roughly 23,000 years. A wall, built by human hands during the last ice age. It shouldn't be there. The last glacial maximum was in full swing. According to conventional timelines, humans were still nomadic, focused on survival, with little time or ability for permanent structures. And yet here in Theopetra, someone had gathered stones and shaped a barrier. Why? The cave itself had long been a site of interest. Excavations showed it had been occupied for over 130,000 years, used by Neanderthals, early Homo sapiens, and later farming communities. It offered shelter, water, and protection. But the wall, just under a meter high, didn't seem to serve a structural purpose. It wasn't load-bearing. It wasn't decorative. Its placement suggests it may have been intended to block cold winds from entering the cave during harsh winters. If so, it would represent one of the earliest known examples of architectural planning in human history. And yet, this presents a problem. If early humans were building walls 23,000 years ago, then how many other signs of such behavior have been lost or simply overlooked? The wall doesn't stand alone. Traces of fire pits, stone tools, and bones suggest a long and complex use of the cave. Over time, the sediment layers have preserved a timeline of evolving human behavior. But the wall feels like a step out of line. Too early, too deliberate. Most structures from that period were temporary. Lean-tos, animal skin shelters, wood and mud huts that left little trace. Stone structures, on the other hand, require time, foresight, and effort. They suggest something more than survival. They hint at permanence, or at least intention. Was this just a practical barrier, or was it a sign of changing thought? No carvings were found, no symbolic art, no burial nearby. The wall seems purely functional, but even so, its age and precision stand as a quiet challenge to our understanding of early innovation. Could this be one of many forgotten markers left by people we've underestimated? Or was it an anomaly, something isolated, accidental, without greater meaning? The Theopetra wall doesn't give us answers. It gives us a crack in the timeline. And through it, we glimpse a version of our ancestors who were already planning, shaping, and altering their environment long before we thought they could. The story doesn't begin in a royal tomb or ancient temple, but in a vineyard. In 1924, two Bulgarian brothers, while tending their land near the village of Valchitran, struck something solid beneath the earth. It wasn't rock, it wasn't bone. It gleamed. They had uncovered gold, thick, heavy, and strangely shaped. What they found would become one of the most enigmatic hoards in European prehistory. 13 objects of nearly pure gold, weighing over 12.5 kilograms. The discovery included shallow hemispherical bowls, domed lids, a dish with a central hole, and one peculiar vessel with dual thick handles, almost modern in design. No inscriptions, no decorative symbols, just flawless metalwork from an unknown hand. Experts dated the objects to around 1300 BCE, placing them in the late Bronze Age. But here's the catch. They didn't fit neatly into any known culture. Many attribute the treasure to the Thracians, a confederation of tribes known for their craftsmanship, rituals, and warrior aristocracy. But even among Thracian finds, the Valchitran treasure is an outlier. Its purity, over 88% gold with traces of silver and copper, speaks of technical skill. Its forms, however, speak in riddles. Were they ritual vessels, solar emblems, parts of a ceremonial set for a now lost rite? Some archaeologists point to the object's peculiar handles and lids as evidence of astronomical or calendrical significance, perhaps used to track celestial events in rituals honoring nature or deities. Yet no associated burial, structure, or settlement was found near the site. The objects were buried barely 40 centimeters deep in unguarded earth. Not a tomb, not a temple, just dirt. Could this have been a hidden cache during political upheaval or conflict? Were they buried in haste, meant to be retrieved later by someone who never returned? Or were they intentionally hidden, not for safekeeping, but as part of a sacred act of sacrifice, returning gold to the earth from which it came? The silence around the hoard is as heavy as the metal itself. Without inscriptions or context, we're left with craftsmanship that whispers of ceremony but never explains its purpose. Gold, in many ancient societies, wasn't merely wealth, it was a medium of the divine. But here there is no altar, no god named, no king remembered. We're left with a paradox: immense value hidden without ceremony, tools of prestige buried without witness. Whatever meaning once surrounded the treasure has long since faded, leaving us with the form but not the function. What if a sacred text, sealed shut by fire for over 1,000 years, could speak again, without ever being opened? In 1970, archaeologists digging through the ruins of an ancient synagogue at En-Gedi, an oasis village near the Dead Sea in Israel, discovered a small, charred lump buried in the debris. The synagogue, dating to around the 6th century CE, had suffered a devastating fire that left its stonework blackened and its contents destroyed. Among the remains was a scroll so carbonized it looked like nothing more than a lump of coal. Any attempt to physically unroll it would have instantly turned it to dust, and so for decades it was stored in silence, its contents unknown, its voice lost. But in 2015, technology caught up to mystery. A team of researchers led by Brent Seals at the University of Kentucky used a technique known as virtual unwrapping, combining micro-CT scans with complex 3D algorithms to peer inside the charred remains without ever disturbing them. The scans digitally reconstructed the scroll's internal layers, allowing researchers to flatten them and visualize the ink trapped inside. What they found was astonishing. The first 8 verses of the Book of Leviticus, written in ancient Hebrew. Despite the destruction, the text was perfectly legible. Even more remarkably, the writing style closely matched that of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date back several centuries earlier. This made the En-Gedi scroll the oldest biblical scroll ever found in a synagogue's holy ark, and the earliest example of a Torah text identical to the Masoretic tradition, the standardized Hebrew Bible used today. This discovery didn't just offer historical confirmation, it rewrote the timeline of biblical textual consistency. The En-Gedi scroll showed that the version of Leviticus in use over 1,500 years ago was nearly identical to the version read in synagogues today, a stunning revelation for scholars of religious history and textual transmission. But the scroll's survival raises more questions than it answers. Why was such a valuable object left to burn? Was it hidden during a time of invasion, perhaps by the Byzantines, Sassanids, or during the early Islamic expansion? Or was it caught in a fire sparked by accident or natural disaster? The scroll was found in the Holy Ark, the holiest part of the synagogue, suggesting it had been placed there deliberately. But for what purpose? Ritual use, protection, or concealment? We still don't know. Equally puzzling is the scroll's condition. Unlike most ancient manuscripts, it wasn't copied or transmitted. It's the original artifact, preserved by destruction. Its blackened exterior, fused into a fragile mass, gave it the appearance of death. Yet within, the words endured untouched, as if sealed for future eyes. The En-Gedi scroll represents more than a triumph of science. It's a paradox made real. Destroyed yet intact, unreadable yet fully legible. A sacred voice silenced by fire, revived by light and code. He was found not in a royal tomb, but in an anonymous side chamber, mouth agape, limbs contorted, frozen in an eternal scream. His body was wrapped in sheepskin, a material considered unclean for burial by ancient Egyptians. No inscriptions, no offerings, no honor, just silence and horror. Known today as Unknown Man E, this mummy was discovered in 1886 in the Deir el-Bahari cache, a hidden tomb that had once sheltered dozens of royal mummies relocated there by priests to protect them from grave robbers. Most were kings and queens, clearly labeled, carefully preserved, but not this one. His appearance shocked even the seasoned archaeologists who opened the coffin. Unlike the others, his body had not been embalmed properly. His organs were still in place. His skin had turned reddish-brown and leathery. His legs were bent sharply at the knees. And that face, mouth wide open, as if caught in the last moment of terror. Why was he treated so differently, and who was he? One prevailing theory links him to one of Egypt's darkest family betrayals. Around 1155 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses III, a conspiracy unfolded within the royal court. According to the judicial papyrus of Turin, a group of officials and harem members, including one of the pharaoh's own sons, plotted to assassinate the king. Their goal was to place the prince, Pentawere, on the throne. The conspiracy failed. Ramesses III was mortally wounded, but managed to name his successor before dying. The traitors were put on trial, and many were sentenced to death or forced suicide. What happened to Prince Pentawere is uncertain. The documents state that one of the main conspirators, the king's son, was made to take his own life. But no tomb or mummy has ever been clearly identified as his, unless some believe he is Unknown Man E. The body's hasty and disgraceful burial fits the story. Sheepskin to mark impurity, lack of proper embalming as punishment, exclusion from royal honors. A genetic study conducted in 2012 found that the Screaming Mummy and Rameses III share the same paternal DNA lineage. If true, it suggests that this tortured body may indeed be the prince, buried not to honor him, but to erase him. And yet, his image endures. The twisted, gaping face has become one of the most haunting icons in the study of Egyptian death. Was it pain that froze his features, or poison? Execution? Something else entirely? Some scholars argue the scream is a natural post-mortem distortion, not emotional at all, but others aren't so sure, because while the body decays, the expression remains. And in that expression, we still hear a voice that never got to speak. What other ancient mysteries linger in the silence of the dead? When divers first descended off the coast of Antikythera in 1900, they expected to find sponges, not the shattered remnants of a lost Hellenistic world. What they surfaced instead would become one of the most perplexing shipwrecks ever discovered. Beneath layers of coral and centuries of sediment lay bronze statues, marble torsos, dismembered limbs, and corroded faces frozen mid-expression. Some were exquisite, others were crude, incomplete, and strangely raw, seemingly abandoned mid-carving or mid-casting. Why? The wreck, located between the Greek islands of Kythera and Crete, dates to around 70 BCE. The ship itself, believed to be a large Roman cargo vessel over 40 meters long, was likely en route from the eastern Mediterranean to Italy. It carried luxury cargo, fine glassware, amphorae filled with wine or oil, intricately carved furniture, finished statues, and among them, unfinished ones. It also contained the now famous Antikythera mechanism, an advanced analog computer that stunned modern scholars. But while that device stole headlines, the statues have quietly held their own enigma. Several were clearly completed, bronze gods, marble athletes, and mythological heroes rendered with breathtaking detail. But others were left in early stages, blocky, awkward, and disproportionately formed. Some pieces retained visible tool marks, with unshaped limbs and surfaces untouched by polish. A few appeared to be rough wax models. Partway through the lost wax casting process, their transformation into bronze halted forever. Why were they on board? Scholars initially theorized the cargo was being transported to Rome, where wealthy elites clamored for Greek art to adorn their villas and gardens. Greek statuary had become a powerful status symbol in the Roman world. Entire industries grew around copying, restoring, or looting classical masterpieces. This explanation fits the presence of complete works. But what of the unfinished ones? One theory suggests these incomplete statues were destined for final touches in Roman workshops. Sculptors in Italy might have completed them to suit local tastes. Another possibility is that the statues were studio discards or flawed casts, shipped as scrap metal to be melted down and reused. Bronze was expensive, and damaged works were often recycled. Yet the presence of both completed and nearly finished pieces complicates these ideas. Why risk transporting imperfect goods alongside masterpieces? And if the statues were only meant for melting, why do so many show signs of promising craftsmanship? Were these prototypes? Commissioned works left incomplete due to disaster or conflict? Adding to the mystery is the sheer scale and diversity of the cargo. Over 36 marble and bronze fragments have been recovered, with many more likely still buried beneath the seabed. The variety suggests this wasn't a simple looting operation, but part of a much larger and organized trade route, a floating gallery or warehouse bound for Roman aristocracy. And then there's the question of the ship's purpose. Was it merely a transport vessel, or could it have been a traveling workshop or salvage expedition? Some scholars wonder if the ship had stopped at multiple coastal cities, gathering art, raw material, and luxury goods before making its final voyage. The presence of the Antikythera mechanism, unlike anything else recovered, adds to this layered complexity. This was not just a cargo of beauty, but of intellect, labor, and wealth. Today, many of the statues remain in fragments. In Greek museums, their broken forms are catalogued and displayed, tagged with numbers rather than names. The unfinished ones sit especially silent. They hint at stories never completed, myths half told, artisans interrupted, moments lost. No other wreck has yielded such a baffling blend of completed elegance and raw potential. It's a puzzle that defies simple answers. In 1595, laborers clearing rubble near the Abbey of Sacromonte in Granada uncovered a sealed lead disc hidden inside a cave wall, wrapped in parchment alongside bone fragments. Over the next 30 years, dozens more were found, flattened sheets of lead, some folded like books, others shaped like medallions. Each bore inscriptions in Latin, Arabic, and an invented script that imitated early Arabic forms. They became known as the Lead Books of Sacromonte. The texts claimed to be the testimonies of early Christian martyrs in Roman Hispania, followers of Saint Cecilio, but their content challenged orthodoxy. They spoke of Christ and the Virgin Mary, but also referred to Muhammad in favorable terms and suggested that Arabic, not Latin or Greek, had been the sacred language of early Christianity in Spain. These ideas, emerging during the reign of Philip III in a post-Reconquista Spain hostile to Morisco culture, were explosive. Were these messages theological bridges or veiled resistance? At first, the discoveries were embraced. Archbishop Pedro de Castro, a powerful church figure sympathetic to the local Morisco population, saw in them divine affirmation that Christianity had deeper, multilingual roots. Public processions were held, relics venerated, and the Abbey of Sacromonte became a pilgrimage site. But not all agreed. As early as the 1630s, scholars began voicing doubts. Linguists noted awkward Latin phrasing and grammatical inconsistencies. Historians challenged the anachronisms. How could texts from Roman times blend languages and concepts that had no historical overlap? By 1642, Spanish historian Nicolas Antonio publicly declared the texts to be forgeries. His accusations reached Rome, where an ecclesiastical commission was formed. After decades of deliberation, the Vatican formally condemned the lead books in 1682, under Pope Innocent XI, denouncing them as heretical fabrications and forbidding their use in religious practice. Still, no author was ever identified. The prevailing theory is that Morisco intellectuals, well-educated descendants of forcibly converted Muslims, crafted the books in the late 16th century as a spiritual protest. By blending Christian and Islamic themes and using both Latin and Arabic, they may have sought to protect a threatened identity. Or was it something more audacious, a deliberate attempt to rewrite Spain's sacred history from within? What sets the lead books apart from common forgeries is their complexity. They were not made for money or fame. They were hidden deliberately, buried alongside bones and relics, and written in a hybrid language that few could read. Their authors expected them to be discovered, just not questioned. Did they believe time would turn their invention into truth? They still reside in Granada, locked in glass, stripped of their sacred status but never dismissed entirely, condemned by the church, ignored by mainstream history, yet never fully explained. In 1906, a team of German archaeologists began excavating Elephantine Island, a narrow strip of land in the Nile near Aswan. Amid the ruins of a Persian military outpost, they uncovered something astonishing. Not statues or gold, but words. Dozens of papyrus scrolls and leather fragments lay buried in the sand, some folded, others rolled or torn. Written in Imperial Aramaic, the administrative language of the Achaemenid Empire, the documents had survived 2.5 millennia, thanks to Egypt's dry heat and protective layers of collapsed architecture. These would become known as the Elephantine Papyri. What they revealed was not a footnote to Jewish history, but a contradiction. In the 5th century BCE, long after the destruction of Solomon's temple, and while the Second Temple was being built in Jerusalem, a Jewish community lived and worshipped on Elephantine. These were not merely merchants or scattered exiles. They were organized, literate, and deeply rooted. Many had likely descended from Jewish mercenaries brought by the Egyptians or Persians to garrison Egypt's vulnerable southern frontier, and they had brought their religion with them. The papyri, over 200 documents now housed in museums across Berlin, Cairo, and New York, paint a picture of a thriving, autonomous Jewish population. They had families, owned property, settled disputes through written contracts. But what stood out most was their temple, not a metaphorical temple or a small gathering place, but a full-scale sanctuary with altars for animal sacrifice, a roster of priests and formal religious rituals. The letters mention regular offerings of rams, incense, and grain. They speak of sacred festivals and a structure dedicated to YHW, a form of the divine name associated with Yahweh. Just meters away stood a temple to Khnum, the ram-headed Egyptian god of creation. The two shrines coexisted, peacefully at times, tensely at others. That tension came to a head in 410 BCE, when a riot broke out, and Egyptian priests allegedly incited the destruction of the Jewish temple. In the aftermath, the Jewish residents penned desperate letters to Bagoas, the Persian governor of Judah, and to the high priest in Jerusalem, requesting permission and funds to rebuild. The letters were formal, diplomatic, and urgent. They outlined the loss and expressed loyalty to the empire. But if a reply was ever sent, it has never been found. What makes the Elephantine temple so controversial is not just its existence, but what it lacked. The community made no mention of the Torah. Their religious observance, while clearly centered on the God of Israel, showed no evidence of the legal restrictions that would later define mainstream Judaism. There was no recorded objection to building a temple outside Jerusalem, no indication that multiple sanctuaries were considered inappropriate. Their tone was not defiant, but matter-of-fact, as if their way of life was neither aberrant nor unorthodox, just another thread in the fabric of Jewish identity. This has fueled intense scholarly debate. Some argue that the Elephantine Jews preserved an older form of Israelite religion, untouched by the centralizing reforms that followed the Babylonian exile. Others believe they were simply adapting, modifying traditions to fit life under Persian rule in a multicultural garrison town. The silence from Jerusalem, whether political, theological, or accidental, has become as significant as the letters themselves. There's also the matter of the temple's fate. By the late 4th century BCE, it vanished from record. Whether it was dismantled under orders or slowly abandoned is unknown. No trace of the structure has been found. Only the texts survive. But those texts, written in steady, practiced hands on sheets of papyrus, carry the weight of a forgotten chapter. They show that Judaism, in its formative centuries, was far from uniform, that sacred spaces existed outside the land of Israel, that theology, once fluid, later hardened into orthodoxy. The Elephantine Papyri aren't a footnote. They're a reminder that the past is rarely neat. A plane takes off, disappears without a trace, and then reappears decades later, as if no time had passed. It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, but this is the legend of Flight 914, a story that has captivated conspiracy theorists and mystery seekers for years. According to the tale, a Douglas DC-4 airliner departed from New York on July 2, 1955, bound for Miami, with 57 passengers and 4 crew members on board. The weather was clear. The flight was routine until it wasn't. Somewhere along the way, the aircraft simply vanished. There were no distress calls, no wreckage, and no explanations. Air traffic control searched for answers, but none came. The plane was presumed lost, another tragic case of aviation disaster. Then, according to the legend, 37 years later, on September 9, 1992, air traffic controllers at Caracas International Airport, Venezuela, picked up an unidentified aircraft on their radar. It had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Confused, the control tower attempted to make contact. The response that came back was impossible. An unfamiliar voice identified the flight as Pan American Airways 914, the same aircraft that had disappeared decades earlier. The plane was said to have landed, and when airport staff approached, they found a crew and passengers who still believed it was 1955. Their clothing, their luggage, even their currency were decades out of date. The pilot, allegedly realizing something was terribly wrong, quickly restarted the engines and took off again before authorities could stop him. Some versions of the story claim the plane disappeared for good, never to be seen again. Others say it reappeared elsewhere, perhaps landing in an undisclosed location hidden from the public eye. Whichever version is told, one eerie detail remains the same: the passengers were untouched by time. For decades, the mystery of Flight 914 spread through books, magazines, and later, the internet. It was whispered about in paranormal circles, cited as evidence of time warps, parallel dimensions, or government cover-ups. Some pointed to alleged eyewitness accounts, while others claimed that newspaper archives held the truth. A single grainy black and white newspaper clipping often surfaces as proof, showing a headline about the plane's return. But when researchers dug deeper, the cracks in the story became obvious. The first known mention of Flight 914 appeared in 1960s tabloid magazines, particularly a sensationalist publication known for fabricated stories. The details changed over time: the plane's flight number, the dates, the location of reappearance, shifting with each retelling. No official airline records mention such a flight. No missing persons reports match the names supposedly on board. And despite claims of newspapers reporting the event, no credible source has ever been found. The famous clipping is nothing more than an altered tabloid article. Yet, despite being debunked, the legend refuses to die. It thrives on mystery, feeding into humanity's fascination with the unexplained, lost time, and impossible disappearances. Some believe stories like this contain a kernel of truth, distorted over time. Others see them as cautionary tales, warning of hidden forces at play in the world. And while Flight 914 may be nothing more than a fabrication, history has no shortage of real, unsolved disappearances, cases where ships and planes vanished without explanation, leaving behind only questions. On India's southeastern coast, near the shores of the Bay of Bengal, stands Mahabalipuram, an ancient city famed for extraordinary stone carvings, whose origins remain veiled in mystery. Constructed primarily between the 7th and 8th centuries CE by the Pallava dynasty, the site's sprawling landscape is dotted with temples, reliefs, and monolithic statues carved directly from massive granite outcrops. Among its most remarkable treasures are the intricate bas-reliefs depicting scenes from Hindu mythology and daily life, masterworks that puzzle historians not only because of their sophistication, but also because many were abruptly left incomplete. One of Mahabalipuram's greatest enigmas is a colossal relief known as Arjuna's Penance, measuring approximately 30 meters wide and 15 meters tall. This remarkable sculpture vividly captures hundreds of figures, deities, sages, elephants, and mystical creatures, in a narrative still open to debate. Scholars remain uncertain if this depicts the hero Arjuna seeking divine favor, or possibly symbolizes the descent of the sacred river Ganges from the heavens. Despite numerous theories, no definitive answer has emerged. Perhaps even more perplexing are the monolithic temples known as Pancharathas, carved from single massive boulders to mimic chariots dedicated to specific deities. Strikingly, these structures seem frozen mid-creation, as though the artists suddenly abandoned their tools and vanished. Why did skilled craftsmen, capable of astonishing precision, leave behind masterpieces in an unfinished state? Historians speculate various possibilities. A sudden war, the decline of the Pallava dynasty, shifts in religious beliefs, or even natural disasters such as tsunamis. Yet none of these fully explain the abrupt cessation of activity across such an extensive and ambitious project. Adding further intrigue, local legends suggest that Mahabalipuram once stretched farther into the ocean, hinting at structures now submerged beneath coastal waters. Recent marine archaeology has indeed identified submerged temples and scattered ruins offshore, lending credibility to stories of a lost city swallowed by rising seas or catastrophic flooding. Today, visitors wander amidst these half-finished marvels, standing face-to-face with unanswered questions etched in stone. Every carving seems to whisper silently of a sudden and mysterious interruption, offering tantalizing clues but guarding deeper truths beneath layers of history. In the harsh emptiness of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, Bedouin tribes spoke of a city that once glittered in the desert sun. Known as Ubar, or Iram of the Pillars, it was said to be a hub of wealth and power, a center of the frankincense trade, and a place so decadent that it drew the wrath of the heavens. According to Quranic legend and pre-Islamic law, Ubar defied divine warnings and was punished for its arrogance, swallowed by the sands in a single cataclysmic moment. For generations, poets sang of it, explorers sought it, and skeptics dismissed it as allegory, a moral tale, not a place. But could a city so thoroughly erased still leave behind a trace? For centuries, Ubar was a ghost chased across maps by dreamers and archaeologists alike. Some believed it was a distorted memory of other ancient cities. Others considered it Arabia's answer to Atlantis, a myth wrapped in spiritual metaphor. It wasn't until the late 20th century that serious efforts to locate it would gain traction through an unlikely source: NASA. In 1984, a joint project between NASA and researchers from Harvard and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory used satellite imagery to scan the vast deserts of Oman. What they found was startling: faint ancient caravan routes etched into the sands, converging on a single location in Dhofar province. Intrigued, an expedition led by Nicholas Clapp, filmmaker and amateur archaeologist, and archaeologist Juris Zarins, set out to investigate. By 1992, the team reached the site of Shizr, where they uncovered the remains of a fortified settlement built atop a massive underground limestone cavern that had collapsed long ago. What they found were the ruins of towers, pottery, and artifacts dating back at least 2,000 years, all pointing to a key outpost in the frankincense trade network. This collapse could explain the sudden disappearance described in legend, where the city was said to have sunk into the earth as punishment. Was this truly Ubar? Some scholars believe the site at Shizr may have been a regional trading center, a kind of gateway to the broader, now-vanished city. Others think it could be the very place that inspired the myth. While not a golden metropolis, The settlement bore striking resemblance to descriptions of Aramu, and its strategic position linked it directly to ancient incense routes that had once enriched the region beyond imagination. The legend spoke of pillars, towering markers of pride and excess, and here they stood, weathered and broken, still rising from the sand. The city, if not Ubar in full, was real enough to validate centuries of storytelling passed from campfire to scripture. But if ancient towers could lie hidden beneath dunes for millennia, what else might remain undiscovered in remote corners of the earth? On the southern island of Okinawa, where forested cliffs slope into coral-fringed seas, a large flat stone was pulled from the soil, weathered, heavy, and covered in carved lines. Not cracks, not scratches, but a deliberate, repeated script, clean, orderly, and completely unknown. This so-called Okinawa Rosetta stone was discovered near the village of Uken in the early 20th century, but received little attention at first. Locals had seen similar stones before, assuming they were religious or decorative relics, but this one stood apart. The inscriptions didn't resemble Japanese kanji, Chinese characters, or even Ryukyuan writing, once used throughout the Okinawan Islands. The lines were vertical and geometric, carved with purpose, yet without any known system to compare them to. Researchers catalogued the stone, measured the grooves, and photographed every symbol. Linguists attempted comparisons with ancient regional scripts, from Jomon petroglyphs to Southeast Asian characters, but none matched. There were no repeating symbols, no syntax anyone could decode. It didn't even follow the pattern of known undeciphered scripts like Linear A. It was something else entirely. Could it be a lost language? If so, whose? Okinawa has a long and layered history. Once independent from Japan, it was the heart of the Ryukyu Kingdom, which traded with China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. But even those cultures left no traces of a script like this. No parallel has been found in cave walls, scrolls, or ancient stones elsewhere in the archipelago. There's no date for the stone. Carbon dating can't be used on rock, and there were no accompanying materials. No tools, no ruins, no burial, just the stone. Some have speculated it belonged to a completely forgotten group, perhaps predating Ryukyuan culture altogether. But without context, those remain guesses. Was it a message, a name, a boundary marker? Or was it something more abstract, ritualistic, symbolic, meant only for those who made it? Even the name Rosetta Stone feels premature. The original Rosetta helped us understand 3 languages. This one reveals none. It has no translation, no key, just silence. Still, it holds weight, both literal and historical. Its grooves are deep, carved with effort. Its symbols don't feel random, and it's not alone. A handful of other carved stones have since surfaced across Okinawa and nearby islands, showing similar markings. But none have led us closer to meaning. Perhaps the script recorded a language spoken by a people whose traces were washed away by time or conquest. Or perhaps it was never a language at all, but a code, meant to be seen, not spoken. In a world where writing is how we remember, this stone reminds us how easily memory can disappear. It was meant to move. Even after more than 3,000 years buried in a peat bog, its wheels still turned. In 1902, on the Danish island of Zealand, a farmer unearthed something extraordinary, a small bronze chariot drawn by a slender horse, pulling a gleaming disc plated in gold. Only later would archaeologists recognize what they were looking at, one of the most haunting and elegant relics of the European Bronze Age. Today, it is known as the Trundholm Sun Chariot. At just over 50 centimeters in length, it may seem modest in size, but its symbolism runs vast. Dated to around 1400 BCE, the object is believed to represent the sun, specifically the mythic journey of the sun across the sky drawn by a divine horse. It is one of the earliest surviving models of cosmological belief in prehistoric Europe. But while many agree on its solar significance, the details remain slippery. Why the wheels? Was this merely a model? Or was it used in actual ritual drawn along a path to mimic the sun's daily arc? The golden disc is decorated on one side, bright and radiant, while the other is bare bronze. Some suggest this duality reflects day and night, the perpetual cycle of death and rebirth, of sun and shadow. Others believe the object may have been a teaching tool for elite priests or shamans, or part of a larger ceremonial set long lost to decay. But it's what we don't know that lingers. The horse, slender and elegant, has no saddle, reins, or rider. It leads the chariot blindly, unburdened, an image not of control but of surrender. Was this how the ancients imagined the cosmos? a solitary force dragging light across the sky, not by will but by fate. Fragments of similar solar symbolism appear in Norse mythology many centuries later, such as Sol, the sun goddess, pulled through the heavens in a chariot by divine horses. But the Trundholm chariot predates these stories by over 1,000 years. Was this object the myth's ancestor? Or was it born of a separate, now-forgotten belief system, one that lived in rituals, then vanished without record? No accompanying texts, no oral tradition, no burial context explain the chariot's use. It was likely broken and deliberately deposited into the bog, possibly as a sacrificial offering. But why destroy something so intricate, so symbolic? Was this the end of its ritual life, or just the beginning of ours as we try to reconstruct what once was sacred? A bronze horse pulled a golden sun through forgotten fields, and in doing so, it left behind a trail of questions stretching far beyond its wheels. Beneath the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, hidden near the valley's edge, lies the unfinished tomb of a man who rose from humble origins to wield unprecedented power in one of history's most enduring civilizations. His name was Senenmut, and though he was neither pharaoh nor priest, he was entrusted with constructing the great mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut and overseeing vast royal projects during Egypt's 18th dynasty. But inside his private tomb, designated TT353, archaeologists discovered something far stranger than architectural plans or funerary art. Painted on the ceiling was a celestial map, the oldest known astronomical representation in Egypt, dating to around 1470 BCE. At first glance, the ceiling seems to follow familiar Egyptian patterns: rows of deities in solar boats, decans representing 10-day star periods, lunar phases, and constellations stretching across the sky. Yet one section stands out and remains unexplained. It depicts a rare planetary conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, and Venus, aligned in a way that doesn't match any known configuration from Senenmut's lifetime. Astronomers attempting to reconstruct the sky of the 15th century BCE using modern star mapping software have failed to find a match. Some suggest the event may have occurred thousands of years earlier, or later. Others argue the alignment may not be astronomical at all, but symbolic. But if so, what was it meant to represent? And why place it in a tomb? The western part of the ceiling is dedicated to lunar cycles, showing the phases of the moon and the passage of hours during the night. The eastern half traces the sun's journey through the sky, marked by star deities. These dual panels aren't merely decorative. They indicate an advanced understanding of celestial movement, timekeeping, and cosmology. Inscriptions link the stars to the afterlife, suggesting that the night sky was not just a clock, but a divine roadmap for the soul. Senenmut held over 80 titles, including Overseer of the Works of the King, Chief Steward of the God's Wife, and Tutor to the King's Daughter. Yet his rise to power is unmatched by others of non-royal blood. Some Egyptologists speculate he may have had access to sacred or scientific knowledge, usually reserved for the priesthood. Others suggest he was part of a deeper intellectual tradition, one now lost. His tomb, curiously, was abandoned unfinished. Despite its elaborate plan and exceptional ceiling, Senenmut was never interred there. No remains were found, no burial equipment. The chambers were sealed but empty. Why construction stopped remains unclear. Was it a political fall from grace, a sudden death, or something more clandestine? Some even propose that the ceiling was a kind of esoteric diagram, a celestial code not meant for the living, but for initiates, those trained to read the heavens as sacred text. The inclusion of planetary alignments that don't correspond to known skies has led fringe theorists to suggest connections to earlier lost civilizations or encoded prophecies. Though unproven, the ceiling continues to resist definitive interpretation. Unlike most tombs, which focus on lineage, judgment, and resurrection, Senenmut's sky-oriented design turns our gaze upward to a universe carefully mapped, but only partly understood. What knowledge was once common enough to paint on a tomb, but is now lost to us? The sands of Egypt are best known for guarding pharaohs, pyramids, and gold, but in 1980, archaeologists digging near the village of Nazlet, Khater, unearthed something far older than any dynasty. It wasn't wrapped in linen or buried in a tomb. It lay in a shallow grave, untouched for over 35,000 years, a nearly complete human skeleton, alone in a prehistoric quarry. At first glance, the bones appeared modern. The skeleton was that of a young adult male, around 165 centimeters tall, with features not unlike those of people today. But subtle details betrayed a deeper mystery. His skull was unusually robust, with prominent brow ridges and a slightly elongated shape. His pelvis and limb proportions didn't quite match the anatomical norms of Homo sapiens. He was both familiar and strange, a human, yet not entirely. Nazlet Khater II, as he came to be called, soon ignited debate across the anthropological world. How could a skeleton with such archaic traits appear so late in the human timeline? Most individuals with similar features lived tens of thousands of years earlier, some even belonging to different human species. Yet here was a man who bore marks of deep evolutionary history, living during a period when anatomically modern humans had supposedly already populated the region. To complicate matters, nearby stone tools and artifacts found at the site revealed an unexpected level of craftsmanship. The tools were finely shaped, functional, and well adapted for quarrying. Whoever this individual was, he wasn't a primitive outlier. He belonged to a community capable of working stone with intention and skill. So what explains this contradiction? One theory suggests that Nazlet Khater II may represent a local population that retained older anatomical traits longer than others, a kind of evolutionary holdout. Another proposes interbreeding, a modern human with genetic contributions from an earlier human species, perhaps even a regional variant we've yet to identify. Some researchers have even wondered whether he descended from a migration that occurred far earlier than expected, long before most models of human movement into North Africa suggest. But these remain only theories. The truth is, no other skeleton like his has been found in the region, not before, not after. He stands alone, a solitary data point with no confirmed relatives. No DNA could be recovered to clarify his lineage, and so he remains what scientists quietly fear the most: an anomaly. Unlike the polished certainty of museum exhibits, real prehistory is messy. Bones turn up where they shouldn't. Faces reappear before their time. And sometimes, a single grave can force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about where we came from. In the quiet hills of Staffordshire, England, stands a monument that has drawn the attention of codebreakers, historians, and conspiracy theorists alike. It's not the monument itself that's unusual. It's the message carved into its base, just 10 letters. A short, seemingly nonsensical sequence, OUOSVAVV, beneath it, flanked by the letters D and M. For over 250 years, no one has deciphered what it means. The monument, known as the Shepherd's Monument, was commissioned in the mid-18th century by Thomas Anson and built on the grounds of Shugborough Hall. Its main feature is a relief, a mirrored copy of Nicolas Poussin's painting Et in Arcadia Ego, showing shepherds pointing toward a tomb. But beneath this classical scene, the carved inscription rests like an afterthought, out of place, unexplained. The two outer letters, D and M, are widely believed to stand for the Latin Dis Manibus, or to the spirits of the dead, a common Roman epitaph. But the string in between, OUOSVAVV, has never been definitively interpreted. Its brevity and placement suggest it's a cipher, but of what? And why? Dozens of theories have emerged over the centuries. Some propose it's a Latin acrostic, a phrase where each letter represents the first word of a sentence, perhaps a religious motto, a family tribute, or even a romantic code between lovers. Others have suggested it encodes biblical references, Masonic secrets, or Rosicrucian symbolism. One of the most enduring and speculative ideas is that it's connected to the Knights Templar, who supposedly guarded ancient knowledge and treasures, including the Holy Grail. This theory gained traction thanks to the monument's association with Poussin's painting, which some believe contains hidden references to the Grail legend. The idea that Shugborough might be a clue in a larger encrypted trail was further fueled by popular books like The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail and the Da Vinci Code. But no credible historical link to the Templars has ever been found. Modern cryptographers, including experts from Britain's GCHQ, Government Communications Headquarters, have tried to crack the code, with no success. Several mathematical and linguistic analyses have been attempted using substitution ciphers, frequency analysis, and polyalphabetic systems. All lead to dead ends. One recent and compelling theory proposed by historian Keith Massey suggests the letters may stand for the Latin phrase Optimi uxoris optimi sororis viduus amantissimus vovit virtutibus. Best of wives, best of sisters, a most devoted widower dedicates this to your virtues. This poetic interpretation aligns with the DM funereal reference and suggests a deeply personal message, perhaps hidden to all but the author. Yet even this theory remains unconfirmed. Despite the efforts of professionals and amateurs alike, The Shugborough inscription has resisted all solutions. Unlike the Rosetta stone, there is no second version to compare, no key to unlock its meaning. It remains, by all definitions, an open cipher. And that's part of its power. The monument draws visitors not because of what it reveals, but because of what it withholds. It stands not as a statement, but as a question, one that may never be answered. Carved into a wall of red granite in the highlands of southern Peru, not far from the shoreline of Lake Titicaca, stands a structure that defies classification. Nearly 2 meters tall and a little over a meter wide, the T-shaped niche is cut with smooth precision into an otherwise natural stone outcrop. It resembles a doorway, but opens onto nothing. Behind it is solid rock. What purpose does a door serve when it leads nowhere? This isolated structure, known today as Aramu Muru, lies in the region of Hyumarca, a landscape long occupied by pre-Inca civilizations. The flat, smoothed stone surface that frames the niche is approximately 7 meters tall and just as wide. At its center sits the so-called door, a recess measuring 1.98 meters high and 1.23 meters wide, but only about 15 centimeters deep. There are no inscriptions, no extensions, no chambers beyond the cut. It is not a tomb, not a gateway, not a monument in any traditional sense. Why carve something so precise without leaving a single clue behind? The surrounding region has been settled for thousands of years. The Pucara culture flourished here from around 500 BCE to 200 CE. Later, the Tiwanaku civilization dominated the Lake Titicaca basin from 400 to 1000 CE, followed by the Inca Empire from the 1200s to the early 1500s CE. Yet Aramu Muru doesn't match any of their known architectural styles. No texts, no oral histories, no colonial records mention it. Could it have been made by a culture we've yet to identify? A legend, unverified but persistent, claims that an Inca priest fleeing the Spanish in the 16th century carried a golden disc to this very spot. He placed it into a small depression beside the niche and vanished into the rock. There's no archaeological evidence to support the story, yet it persists. Was the legend invented to explain the structure, or was the structure preserved because of the legend? Academic interpretations remain cautious. Some believe the doorway was an abandoned construction project, a shrine or ceremonial gateway left incomplete. Others argue it may have served a symbolic or astronomical role, yet the niche aligns with no known solstice, no sacred orientation. Why commit so much labor to carve red granite, a notoriously hard stone, with no obvious function, no markings, no offerings, and no aftermath? Even stranger is what surrounds it. Nothing. Most Andean huacas, sacred places, are part of a broader ceremonial landscape, tied to water, sky, or burial. Aramu Muru is entirely alone. There are no pottery shards, no tools, no footprints in history. Was it part of a vanished ritual, or was isolation itself the point? In the 1990s, the site gained international attention from New Age circles, who proclaimed it a stargate or portal to another dimension. Theories multiplied in the vacuum left by fact, but no evidence has ever emerged. Only questions, silence, and a perfectly symmetrical niche cut into one of the hardest stones in the Andes. It is not hidden, yet it offers nothing to enter. It was made to be seen but not explained. The ground cracked open beneath the Mesopotamian sun, and from it rose a face that wasn't meant to be seen again. In 1843, French consul and archaeologist Paul-Émile Botta stood before a monumental figure emerging from the earth near the village of Khorsabad in northern Iraq. At first, he thought he had found Nineveh. In truth, he had uncovered the long-lost capital of King Sargon II, Dur-Sharrukin, the fortress of Sargon. The city had been forgotten for over 2 millennia, but the statues had waited. Towering more than 4 meters tall and carved from solid gypsum, the creatures were like nothing else in the ancient world. Each had the body of a bull or lion, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a man crowned with a horned cap, an embodiment of strength, swiftness, vision, and divine authority. These were Lamassu, the great protective spirits of the Assyrian Empire. Installed at the entrances of palaces and citadels, they did not kneel or bow. They stood, frozen mid-step, silently commanding respect from all who passed beneath them. Botta's team uncovered them buried in collapsed palace gates, half submerged in layers of debris. They were not alone. Chambers of relief carvings, inscriptions, and broken statues surrounded them, remnants of a city that had never fulfilled its purpose. Dur-Sharrukin had been built rapidly under Sargon II's reign and was intended as a symbol of imperial power. But when the king died in battle in 705 BCE, the capital was abandoned. The Lamassu, placed so carefully at its gates, remain to guard nothing but dust. Dozens of lamassu have been recovered from sites like Dur-Sharrukin, Nineveh, and Nimrud. Most appear in nearly identical poses: front-facing heads, 5 legs to suggest motion, symmetrical wings, stylized beards. Inscriptions carved along their flanks invoked blessings and curses, calling on gods to protect the palace while threatening destruction upon any who would harm it. Despite their consistency, no ancient record explains why this specific form, part animal, part bird, part man, was so obsessively repeated. Theories abound. Some scholars view the lamassu as spiritual guardians, adapted from earlier Sumerian and Akkadian beliefs. Others see them as political tools, living metaphors of empire, designed to inspire awe and suppress rebellion. Their silence has kept the answer just beyond reach. In the 19th century, several of the recovered lamassu were transported to Europe. Botta sent some to the Louvre in Paris, where they still stand today. More followed. One pair now resides in the British Museum, another in the Oriental Institute of Chicago. Transporting them was an ordeal of ingenuity. Teams used sledges, barges, and reinforced crates to move these 20-ton blocks of history across continents. Others remained in Iraq, some protected, many not. In 2015, the world watched in horror as extremist militants released footage of lamassu being destroyed in the ruins of Nineveh. It wasn't just an act of vandalism, it was the deliberate erasure of a voice that had endured for 2,700 years without speaking a word. Even in ruin, they persist. Their broken wings and weathered faces continue to provoke unease and fascination. To stand before one, whether in a museum or amid ruins, is to feel the weight of a civilization that engineered myth into architecture. The lamassu do not tell stories. They occupy space. Their forms endure, not to be understood, but to be endured. Few disappearances are as unsettling as that of the USS Cyclops, a 19,000-ton naval collier that vanished without a trace in 1918, taking 309 men with it. The ship was part of the US Navy's fleet, responsible for carrying coal to fuel warships. It was massive, nearly 170 meters long, capable of carrying thousands of tons of cargo. Yet despite its size, no distress call was ever sent, no wreckage was ever found, and no definitive explanation has ever surfaced. It is to this day one of the greatest maritime disappearances in history. The Cyclops departed from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, on February 16, 1918, loaded with manganese ore bound for Baltimore, Maryland. Along the way, it made an unscheduled stop in Barbados for supplies. Witnesses at the port noted that the ship was sitting unusually low in the water, likely due to its heavy cargo. The crew reported engine troubles, but the captain, George Worley, chose to continue the voyage. On March 4, 1918, the Cyclops left Barbados heading north. It was expected to arrive in Baltimore within days. It never did. What makes this case so disturbing is the absolute lack of evidence. No distress signal was sent, and no ships in the area reported spotting the Cyclops. Even after an extensive search by the Navy, not a single piece of debris, lifeboat, or body was ever recovered. It was as if the ship had simply been erased from existence. Over the years, theories have attempted to explain its fate. Some speculate that structural weaknesses in the ship, worsened by the heavy manganese cargo, caused it to break apart in rough seas. Others suggest it was a victim of German U-boats, as World War I was raging at the time, though no German records indicate such an attack. Some even believe Captain Worley himself, a man with a reputation for erratic behavior and suspected German sympathies, may have deliberately sabotaged the voyage. But none of these theories fully explain why such a massive ship disappeared without leaving a single clue. The USS Cyclops vanished in an area now infamous for unexplained disappearances, the Bermuda Triangle. This vast expanse of ocean, stretching between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, has long been associated with mysterious vanishings of ships and aircraft. Some claim magnetic anomalies, rogue waves, or unknown natural forces played a role in the Cyclops' fate. Others entertain supernatural explanations, believing the ship was lost to some unknown force lurking in the triangle. Whatever the cause, one chilling fact remains. The Cyclops was not the last US Navy ship to vanish in the same region. In later years, two of its sister ships, the USS Nereus and USS Proteus, also disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. Like the Cyclops, they were carrying heavy ore. Like the Cyclops, they were lost without a trace. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops remains one of the greatest maritime mysteries in history, a haunting reminder of how even the largest vessels can simply cease to exist. But some disappearances don't begin in silence. Crafted in the twilight years of Rome's greatness, the Lycurgus cup stands alone as one of antiquity's most astonishing achievements. At first glance, the cup appears merely a beautifully detailed artifact depicting the mythological punishment of the Thracian king Lycurgus, ensnared in grapevines for defying the god Dionysus. But as light touches its glassy surface, something extraordinary occurs. The cup's color inexplicably shifts from jade green to radiant ruby red. How could artisans from the 4th century CE produce a masterpiece capable of such optical magic? For centuries, the Lycurgus cup puzzled scientists and historians alike. Only recently has modern technology uncovered its secret. Embedded within its glass are tiny particles, nanoparticles, of gold and silver, each roughly 50 nanometers across, smaller than the width of a human hair. Remarkably, when illuminated from different angles, these particles cause dramatic color changes, an effect known today as dichroism. This sophisticated manipulation of light was achieved by Roman craftsmen nearly 1,600 years before modern science would even comprehend such possibilities. Yet despite this scientific breakthrough, the methods behind its creation remain largely mysterious. The precision needed to embed nanoparticles so perfectly within molten glass seems improbably advanced for Roman artisans. Scholars suggest the techniques may have been discovered by accident, perhaps resulting from impurities in raw materials or unique experimentation in glassmaking workshops. Yet no surviving ancient text describes anything resembling this method, suggesting it might have been a closely guarded trade secret, lost when the Roman Empire fell. Further deepening the mystery, the cup is singular among Roman artifacts. No identical or even comparable piece has ever been found. Why create something of such complexity only once? Was it a commissioned piece designed for a wealthy patron, or perhaps part of a forgotten religious ritual, where the transformation of colors symbolized divine intervention or spiritual revelation? Currently, the Lycurgus cup rests behind protective glass in the British Museum, carefully shielded from the world's curiosity. Visitors gaze upon it in wonder, captivated by the vibrant interplay of colors, unaware that it quietly challenges our assumptions about ancient knowledge and technological prowess. Long before Homer sang of Greek heroes, before the Bible chronicled ancient kingdoms, there lived a man named Gilgamesh, or so the old tales said, a mighty king of Uruk, 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, who battled monsters, defied gods, and searched for immortality. His story was preserved only in scattered fragments, whispered down through generations. Many believed him to be nothing more than Mesopotamian folklore, a myth carved in metaphor, not stone. And yet in the heart of modern-day Iraq, the dust of forgotten empires held a different truth. In the mid-19th century, British archaeologist Austin Henry Layard began excavating the mounds of Kuyunjik, unaware he was about to uncover Nineveh, the lost capital of the Assyrian Empire. Once a thriving metropolis and the crown jewel of Assyria under King Ashurbanipal, Nineveh had been wiped from memory after its destruction in 612 BCE. Its name lived on in ancient scripture, but its reality had slipped beneath the surface of time. What Layard unearthed changed the course of history. Amid the palace ruins, archaeologists discovered a remarkable archive, the Library of Ashurbanipal, a vast collection of over 30,000 clay tablets, meticulously arranged and inscribed in cuneiform. These weren't mere accounts of trade or taxes. They were literature, legal codes, omens, rituals, and epic poems, and among them, pressed into hardened clay, was the complete Epic of Gilgamesh. Dated to around 2100 BCE, this tale predated Homer by over 1,000 years. In it, Gilgamesh journeys with his companion En-Gedi, faces divine wrath, mourns death, and ultimately confronts the limits of human mortality. What had been assumed to be allegory was, in fact, a carefully preserved piece of ancient Mesopotamian culture, retold, refined, and revered for centuries. The discovery not only gave us the oldest known literary masterpiece, it reshaped our understanding of early civilization. Here was a society so advanced that it archived its myths, beliefs, and history in systematic collections, anticipating modern libraries by millennia. Yet questions still linger. Was Gilgamesh truly a king, or a symbolic composite? Archaeological records list a King Gilgamesh of Uruk in the Sumerian king list, but his life remains shrouded in the fog between history and storytelling. And what other voices lie unread among the broken tablets stored in museum basements, still untranslated, still waiting? From Nineveh's ashes rose not only a lost city, but a lost worldview, one that dared to immortalize a mortal man and in doing so outlived empires. In the 1930s, a family hiking near the small town of London, Texas, spotted something odd sticking out of a rock ledge. It was a piece of wood, weathered and rounded but clearly shaped. When they cracked the surrounding rock open, they found the rest of it, a metal hammerhead still attached to the wooden handle, sealed inside what appeared to be ancient stone. That alone would have made it a curious find, but tests on the surrounding rock suggested something more unsettling. According to some geologists, the stone was part of a formation dating back over 100 million years, from the Cretaceous period, long before humans were thought to exist. A human-made tool sealed in ancient rock. How? The object became known as the London Hammer. It's a simple tool, an iron head with a wooden shaft. The hammerhead is roughly 15 centimeters long, with flat ends and a smooth shape. X-ray analysis showed it to be made of over 96% iron, with traces of chlorine and sulfur, and without modern refining marks. Its composition is unusually resistant to rust, even after decades of exposure since its discovery. Skeptics have offered explanations. Some argue that the stone isn't as old as it seems, that minerals may have formed around the hammer in recent centuries through a process known as concretion, which can mimic much older geological structures. In other words, the rock may be young even if it looks ancient. But that's the debate. What's older, the hammer or the rock around it? The hammer itself hasn't been dated directly, and much of the analysis comes from independent or private researchers. The original find was also disturbed, opened with a hammer and chisel before any formal documentation, leaving room for uncertainty. Without clear provenance, mainstream archaeology has largely dismissed the hammer as an anomaly or misunderstanding. Yet it remains, physically intact, quietly displayed. It challenges less with what it is, and more with the suggestion it raises. If it truly predates known human history, then something doesn't add up. If it doesn't, then why was it encased so completely, so convincingly in rock no one can agree on? It's a reminder that sometimes it isn't the complexity of an object that causes doubt. It's how ordinary it is, a simple tool, a common form, in the wrong place. They weren't just a few scattered remains. They filled tunnels, thousands upon thousands of them. Mummified birds, row after row, stacked in niches carved into rock beneath the sands of Saqqara, Egypt's vast necropolis. Most were falcons and ibises, sacred animals linked to the gods Horus and Thoth. But it wasn't the presence of these birds that puzzled archaeologists. It was the scale. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, explorers uncovered underground catacombs near Saqqara's step pyramid that housed more than 4 million mummified animals, with birds making up the overwhelming majority. Some catacombs stretched for hundreds of meters, lined with jars and linen-wrapped remains. The so-called Falcon Necropolis was one of several such caches, each devoted to a single species, each carefully sealed. In ancient Egyptian religion, animals weren't mere symbols, they were divine incarnations. The ibis represented Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. The falcon embodied Horus, god of the sky and kingship. Pilgrims would offer mummified animals as votive gifts to gain divine favor. But at this scale, something feels different. Many of the bird mummies are surprisingly crude, hastily wrapped, containing only partial remains or in some cases no animal at all. This has led some researchers to believe that the practice became industrialized over time. Evidence now suggests that specialized breeding farms existed near temples, raising birds specifically for ritual slaughter. What began as sacred devotion may have morphed into a sprawling religious economy, an ancient spiritual industry fueled by demand, ritual obligation, and profit. Yet, even with this practical lens, questions remain. Why bury millions of these offerings in underground mazes? Why were they so meticulously sealed and preserved if many were symbolic fakes? And why so many? Some scholars argue these mass burials reflect societal anxiety, an effort to win divine protection in uncertain times. Others believe they were part of seasonal festivals, repeated for centuries. Still, the atmosphere within these catacombs feels heavy, not transactional. The silence, the sameness, the endless echo of wings that will never fly again. It suggests something more, a deep collective act of faith or fear or both. Today, many of these mummies lie untouched, sealed in corridors too narrow or unstable to excavate. What else rests inside? What ritual logic once governed this subterranean aviary? We may never know what prayers were spoken above as these offerings were lowered below. In the limestone highlands of Yunnan province, southern China, a discovery in a small cave shook the foundations of human evolutionary theory. It wasn't a lost city or a buried monument. It was bones, ancient, weathered, and strangely unfamiliar. The site, known as Red Deer Cave or Maludong, was excavated in 1989, but it wasn't until decades later in 2012 that researchers published findings that sparked international debate. Inside the cave were partial skulls, femurs, jaws, and other remains that seemed to belong to no known species. Dated to just 14,000 to 17,000 years ago, the bones weren't from Homo erectus or Neanderthals. They weren't even from Homo sapiens, at least not entirely. The individuals had thick skull bones, prominent brow ridges and flat faces, traits common in more ancient hominins, but they also had modern brain sizes and relatively short, broad bodies. Their lower jaws lacked chins. The mix of archaic and modern features was unlike anything seen before. These people didn't fit into any known evolutionary line. Named the Red Deer Cave people after the animal remains found alongside them, which suggests they hunted and cooked red deer on site. The individuals posed a staggering question. Could an archaic human species have survived in isolated pockets while Homo sapiens spread across the globe? Some scientists proposed they were a previously unknown species, possibly descended from an early migration of hominins into East Asia that had remained genetically isolated. Others argued they were modern humans with unusual traits, perhaps a regional variant. A third theory speculated they could be hybrids between modern humans and a now extinct archaic group. Complicating the debate, genetic material has been difficult to extract from the remains. Without DNA, researchers are left with skeletal clues, fragments of faces, teeth, and limb proportions that hint at something different, but stop short of confirmation. In paleoanthropology, morphology can suggest, but not definitively prove, identity. Their tools and cultural signs were minimal, offering no clear clues to language, art, or burial practices. But their presence at such a recent date challenges long-held assumptions about the timeline of human dominance. If another hominin species did survive into the late Ice Age, what happened to them? Were they outcompeted, absorbed genetically, or did they simply vanish into history without a trace? The Red Deer Cave people remind us that the human story is not linear. It's a web, tangled, overlapping, and filled with vanished chapters. In the heart of Delhi, standing quietly amid the ruins of the Qutub complex, is a pillar that has defied both time and nature. Over 7 meters tall and weighing more than 6 tons, it is not decorated with gold or inlaid with jewels. It is iron, plain, black, ancient, and it should have rusted away long ago. But it hasn't. For over 1,600 years, the Delhi Iron Pillar has endured monsoon rains, intense heat, and urban pollution, yet it remains remarkably corrosion-free. Made not of modern stainless steel but of nearly pure wrought iron, the pillar resists oxidation in ways no ancient artifact should. In a world where bridges, nails, and tools fall prey to rust within decades, this column has survived untouched, and no one is entirely sure how. The pillar is believed to have been erected during the Gupta Empire, likely in the 4th or 5th century CE, and may have originally stood in central India before being relocated to Delhi centuries later. An inscription in Sanskrit on its surface praises a ruler named Chandragupta II and describes his military victories. But the real marvel lies not in what's written, but in how it was made. Ancient Indian blacksmiths used a forge welding technique to build the column, layering hot iron in a way that created a protective passive film over time. This thin layer, composed of iron hydrogen phosphate, has shielded the pillar from environmental damage. But this explanation, while technically sound, doesn't fully explain the consistency of the craftsmanship or the purity of the iron, both astonishing for the era. Metallurgists have studied the pillar for decades, attempting to reverse engineer its secrets. How did Gupta-era craftsmen create such high-quality iron on such a large scale? Why did they choose to do it at all, and for what purpose? Some speculate the pillar was meant as a Dvaja Stamba, a flagstaff in honor of a deity, or as a cosmic axis connecting heaven and earth. Others suggest it was a demonstration of imperial power, showing off not just conquest, but technological supremacy. More fringe theories have emerged over the years, of course, from suggestions of ancient alien knowledge to lost metallurgical formulas passed down from even older civilizations. But no wild claim has ever been needed to make the pillar remarkable. It is already extraordinary by its very existence. Even modern engineers admit they couldn't easily reproduce it today, not without advanced machinery and precision control over materials. And that's the real mystery. The knowledge to create something so durable seems to have existed in an age when it shouldn't have. And then, just as mysteriously, it disappeared. Today, tourists walk past the pillar without a second glance. Pigeons rest on it. Some wrap their arms around it, hoping for blessings, but few stop to ask the question it quietly demands. How did it last, when everything else turned to dust? In the highlands of southern Ethiopia, an ancient silence lingers among the grass. Scattered across a low ridge near the town of Tyre stand dozens of upright stone pillars, some plain, some engraved with swords, figures, and cryptic symbols. They rise like sentinels from the soil, watching over a landscape that has long since forgotten their purpose. This is the site of the Tyre megaliths, one of the most enigmatic archaeological discoveries in Africa. There are over 40 stelae at the site, ranging in height from 1 to 2 meters. Most are made of local stone, worn by time and weather, but still bearing carvings that seem to hint at stories once known. Many display stylized swords, broad blades with distinct pommels, while others show schematic human figures, perhaps warriors or spirits. Despite their stark visual simplicity, the symbols vary greatly from stone to stone, offering no clear pattern, no obvious narrative. The site was first documented in the 1930s and later excavated in the 1980s by French archaeologists, who discovered that the stones were grave markers. Beneath many of the stelae lay human remains, often placed in crouched positions, sometimes buried with pottery or beads. Carbon dating suggests the site was active between the 12th and 14th centuries CE, though the cultural identity of those buried here remains unknown. What makes Tyre especially mysterious is that it doesn't fit neatly into Ethiopia's known historical frameworks. It postdates the great Aksumite Empire, but predates the expansion of the Oromo people into the region. There is no written language associated with the site, and no oral tradition explaining who built it or why. The swords carved on the stelae do not match known Ethiopian weapon styles, nor do they resemble the iconography of Christian or Islamic art, both of which were present in the region at the time. Some archaeologists believe Tyre was part of a broader megalithic tradition that once stretched across southern Ethiopia and into parts of Kenya and Sudan, evidence of a lost or poorly understood civilization that has since vanished. Other similar sites have been found, but none as dense or symbolically rich as Tyre. The presence of swords suggests that the buried individuals may have been warriors, or that martial strength held symbolic value in this culture. Yet some of the stones depict what appear to be breasts, hinting at female figures, perhaps indicating gender-specific roles or social status. There are also geometric shapes, crescents, and crosses whose meanings remain obscure. Unlike other famous megalithic sites, such as Stonehenge or Göbekli Tepe, the Tyre stelae are intimate and human-scaled. They do not overwhelm the landscape but blend into it, clustered modestly among grass and trees. And perhaps for that reason, they feel closer, like echoes from a civilization just out of reach. UNESCO designated Tyre a World Heritage Site in 1980, recognizing it as a rare and valuable glimpse into a forgotten chapter of African prehistory. But to this day, we still don't know what language its builders spoke, what beliefs they held, or why they carved what they did. All we know is that someone, hundreds of years ago, stood on this same soil, raised these stones, and etched their legacy in symbols they believed would endure. And they did, but without their meaning. On the eastern coast of Tenerife in Spain's Canary Islands, 6 step pyramids rise from volcanic soil. Built without mortar, their lava stone blocks are carefully arranged in terraces, each flat-topped and sharply edged. At first glance, they might be mistaken for agricultural features, just piles of stones cleared from farmland. For years, that's exactly how they were dismissed. But why would farmers build such symmetrical tiered structures only in this one place? That question drew the attention of Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl in the 1990s. When he arrived in the town of Gima, he saw not crude heaps, but calculated geometry. The steps were uniform, the edges sharp, the terraces methodically stacked. Heyerdahl partnered with Spanish astronomer Antonio Belmonte, and together they uncovered something more. On June 21st, the summer solstice, the sun sets directly between 2 of the pyramids. Their western faces also align with the rising sun during the winter solstice. Was this astronomical planning, or just an illusion of alignment? Mainstream scholars remain unconvinced. Most argue the pyramids were built during the 19th century CE as part of local farming efforts or landscape modification. The land was once owned by Don Felipe, a Freemason. Some suggest he either constructed or preserved the pyramids as symbolic monuments reflecting Masonic beliefs. But no records survive, and no one knows whether he built them or simply let them stand. Why would a landowner in the 1800s go to such lengths for symmetry and sun? Archaeologists note that no organic materials, artifacts, or burial sites have been found beneath or around the pyramids, nothing that would indicate pre-Hispanic origin. The Guanche people, who inhabited Tenerife from at least 1000 BCE, left behind cave dwellings and circular sanctuaries, but no pyramids. If these structures were truly ancient, why is there no trace of them in Guanche tradition? Still, the forms remain provocative. They bear a resemblance to pyramids found in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and Polynesia, cultures that Heyerdahl believed were linked by ancient sea routes. He proposed the pyramids were evidence of transoceanic contact, a theory supported by pattern but not by excavation. Could such a theory ever be proven without tools, bones, or offerings? Or are we simply seeing connections where none exist? In 1998, the site was preserved as the ethnographic park of the Pyramids of Gima. It showcases Heyerdahl's research, solar observatories, and exhibits on navigation and ancient cultures. But the pyramids themselves remain elusive. They are too symmetrical to dismiss as accidental, too recent to be called ancient, too orderly to be ignored. If they were built merely to clear fields, why do they align with the sun? And if they were meant to mean something, what was it? The first object came up in the bucket of a mechanical dredger, dull at first, then flashing gold in the light. It was 2016, and crews working on a riverbank restoration project near Pengshan in China's Sichuan province had disturbed something buried for centuries. What followed would become one of the most significant treasure finds in modern Chinese archaeology. The muddy bed of the Min River had been hiding a royal hoard, lost, forgotten, and scattered across nearly 500 square meters of submerged silt. As soon as word reached the Sichuan Provincial Institute of Cultural Relics and Archaeology, the site was sealed off. Over the next months, archaeologists waded into the cold, murky waters to begin an excavation unlike any other. Visibility was near zero. Divers worked by touch, guided by sonar, inching through sediment that shifted with every current. Pump systems had to be installed to manage the river flow, creating brief windows of access between seasonal floods. And with every scoop of earth, the story grew. Gold ingots stamped with the seals of the Ming and Qing dynasties, bronze tiger-shaped belt hooks inlaid with silver, blades forged for ceremony, not war, a solid gold mask beaten thin, still bearing the impression of a face long gone. Over 50,000 items have been recovered so far, artifacts of staggering variety and craftsmanship, many ritually bent or broken, as if deliberately made unusable before burial or loss. The origin of this submerged trove is tied to the violent collapse of a kingdom that barely existed. In the mid-17th century, rebel general Zhang Xianzhong declared himself ruler of Sichuan during the chaos of the Ming-Qing transition. His rule was brief, beginning in 1644 and ending violently just 2 years later. Contemporary records describe him as ruthless, his rule marked by massacres and fear. As Qing forces advanced, Zhang attempted to flee Chengdu with his treasury. Somewhere near the Min River, his convoy was attacked or caught in the shifting terrain. The treasure, loaded into barges or carts, vanished into the water. Zhang himself was killed shortly after by Qing troops. His body was displayed, his rebellion extinguished. No map of the hoard was ever found, no inventory survived. For generations, only river legends remained, until the Min began to give back what it had taken. The debate over the treasure's meaning continues. Some scholars argue that these were simply looted goods, plunder from temples and nobles gathered in haste. Others believe the items show a deliberate effort at state building, reflecting a short-lived court that mimicked the visual grammar of imperial power. The presence of foreign silver coins and imported jade suggests trade and long-distance acquisition, but no definitive interpretation has emerged. The items speak, but not clearly. Today, many of the recovered artifacts are held at the Jinsha Site Museum in Chengdu and in national collections across China. Conservation work continues in secure labs, where soil samples and microabrasions are studied to determine origin, method, and intent. Each piece adds to a picture that remains incomplete: a court in exile, a fortune on the run, a river that swallowed it all without a trace of ceremony. The River of Gold remains an active site, but its message is frozen in the moment of collapse. Zhang's ambition died with him. His name survives only in footnotes and folklore, but the treasure, bent, buried, and broken, remains defiantly intact. During World War II, warships were built to withstand the most extreme conditions, battle, storms, and the relentless open sea. But in November 1941, the HMAS Sydney, one of Australia's most formidable light cruisers, vanished without a single survivor. 645 men lost, no distress signal sent, no clear explanation. It would take nearly 7 decades before the mystery of its fate was finally uncovered. The Sydney was a powerful and battle-hardened warship, nearly 172 meters long, armed with 8 152 mm guns, torpedo tubes, and anti-aircraft weapons. It had already earned a fearsome reputation, having played a decisive role in the Battle of the Mediterranean. In November 1941, it was returning from escort duty in Southeast Asia when it encountered what appeared to be a merchant vessel off the coast of Western Australia. The ship identified itself as the Straat Malacca, a Dutch freighter, but something wasn't right. The vessel didn't respond properly to signals, and as the Sydney got closer, too close, the trap was sprung. The supposed freighter was no merchant ship at all. It was the Cormoran, a German raider, heavily armed and disguised to lure unsuspecting warships into deadly encounters. At point-blank range, the Cormoran unleashed its full arsenal. Shells tore through Sydney's bridge, communications and turrets in seconds, rendering it nearly defenseless. The Australian cruiser fought back, inflicting fatal damage on the German ship, but the damage to Sydney was catastrophic. Eyewitnesses from the Cormoran, who later survived, reported that the Sydney drifted away, engulfed in flames, before disappearing beyond the horizon. It was never seen again. For decades, the mystery deepened. The wreckage remained missing, and not a single crew member survived to tell the story. The lack of survivors was particularly eerie. Why had no one escaped in lifeboats? While the Cormoran's crew had time to abandon ship, the Sydney seemed to vanish completely. Search efforts found nothing, and conspiracy theories emerged. Some believed that a Japanese submarine was secretly involved, attacking the Sydney before Japan's official entry into the war. Others suspected the German account was false, that survivors had been executed, or that the ship had been secretly towed away. But without evidence, these theories remained speculation. Then, in 2008, after decades of searching, the wreck of HMAS Sydney was finally discovered 2,500 meters below the surface, off the coast of Western Australia. The wreckage revealed the truth. The Sydney had suffered a direct hit to its magazine, causing a massive explosion. The ship had drifted for hours, before eventually sinking into the abyss. The reason for no survivors became clear. With its lifeboats destroyed and the ship taking on water, no one had a chance to escape. Even with the wreck found, the Sydney remains one of World War II's most haunting maritime disasters. The way it was lured into a fatal encounter, its complete destruction, and the loss of every man aboard make it one of the most devastating naval disappearances in history. But while the Sydney's wreck was eventually found, not all disappearances are ever solved. Discovered by chance in 1881, hidden in a humble field near the village of Bakhshali in present-day Pakistan, a peculiar manuscript quietly challenged history's very foundations. This ancient collection of birch bark pages, etched meticulously in Sanskrit, holds one of humanity's most groundbreaking achievements, the early use of the mathematical zero. Yet as scholars explored its delicate pages, they uncovered an anomaly far stranger than the presence of zero. The manuscript itself appeared to defy logic, its pages mysteriously spanning several centuries. Radiocarbon tests conducted in recent years revealed results both astonishing and inexplicable. Different sections of this single manuscript date from drastically different periods, stretching improbably from the 3rd to the 10th century CE. This revelation stunned historians, raising perplexing questions. How could such a manuscript come into existence, carefully compiled over nearly 700 years without explanation or precedent? Was it a collaborative work, passed meticulously between generations of scholars? Or perhaps a treasured text continually updated by monks, scribes, or mathematicians, determined to preserve and build upon ancient wisdom? Compounding the mystery, the manuscript's contents reveal advanced mathematical concepts, calculations, and algorithms that were centuries ahead of their time. Within its fragile pages lie algebraic methods, decimal notation, and remarkably sophisticated arithmetic. Such innovations suggest that mathematics in ancient India reached heights previously unimagined. existing quietly alongside common belief, far from recorded historical acknowledgement. Yet no known historical records reference the Bakhshali manuscript explicitly, nor do ancient scholars mention this groundbreaking text. Its sudden appearance, combined with an impossibly broad temporal range, puzzles historians and mathematicians alike. Did the manuscript represent accumulated knowledge guarded secretly by an elite scholarly circle, or was it intentionally concealed, a prized compendium deliberately hidden from those unworthy of understanding its significance? Carefully preserved in the Bodleian Library at Oxford University, the Bakhshali manuscript continues to captivate researchers to this day. Its intricate ancient script and delicate calculations quietly whisper about a scholarly lineage that transcended generations, leaving historians chasing shadows, unable to fully reconstruct its fascinating past. Some legends aren't buried beneath soil, they're hidden in plain sight across the surface of the sea. In the Indian epic Ramayana, the Prince Rama embarks on a divine mission to rescue his wife Sita from the demon king Ravana in the island kingdom of Lanka. To reach her, Rama's army of Vanaras, mythical monkey warriors, constructs a massive bridge across the ocean, stone by stone, guided by divine will. That bridge, known as Ram Setu or Adam's Bridge, has lived for thousands of years in religious texts, folklore, and temple rituals. But to science, it was simply a legend, until the skies themselves told a different story. In 2002, satellite images from NASA astonished scholars and skeptics alike. A chain of limestone shoals stretching nearly 48 kilometers linked Pamban Island in India to Mannar Island in Sri Lanka. Submerged in some parts, visible in others, the formation appeared oddly linear, as though following a path set by ancient hands. Though geologists argue it is a natural formation, the alignment is so precise that it reignited debates. Could this be the echo of something man-altered? Ancient causeways built atop sandbanks, now eroded by centuries of tide. Historical records add more fuel. 9th century Islamic texts refer to this as a traversable land bridge. Early British maps label it Adam's Bridge, linked to the Islamic belief that Adam crossed it after being cast out of paradise. In Hindu traditions, it is sacred proof of a divine past. Could multiple cultures have preserved the same memory in different forms? The composition of the bridge is also curious. Geological surveys show that the shoals sit atop a sand base, but some of the rocks appear to have been transported, not formed in situ. A study by the Geological Survey of India in the early 2000s suggested that parts of the formation might be man-made, or at least human-altered, dated to around 7,000 years ago, a time well before advanced maritime construction should have been possible. Yet there's no consensus. The debate remains as much spiritual as it is scientific. To millions of believers, Ram Setu is sacred geography, a testament to ancient gods and the resilience of faith. To skeptics, it's an unusual yet explainable product of tides and tectonics. But neither side can deny this. A story once considered pure mythology is now anchored to a physical place, charted on maps and studied by scientists. It may never be proven whether humans or gods shaped the shoals, but the legend that once floated above the sea now runs straight through it. In 2018, during routine construction in the crowded streets of Alexandria, Egypt, a team of workers uncovered a stone structure 2 meters below ground. It was a sarcophagus, massive, dark, and unmarked. Black granite, nearly 3 meters long. At 30 tons, it was one of the largest ever found in the city. No inscriptions, no carvings, no names. Alexandria is a city built on layers of history. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, it was once home to the famed library, the Pharaoh's lighthouse, and the tombs of rulers and philosophers. So when archaeologists realized this coffin had lain undisturbed for over 2,000 years, speculation ignited. Was this the lost tomb of Alexander himself? Could it be a royal burial sealed in secrecy? The public imagined curses, plagues, hidden treasures. Some warned not to open it at all. When the lid was finally lifted, the answer was more confusing than revealing. Inside were the partial remains of 3 people, likely soldiers or officials. Their bones were damaged, scattered, and soaked in a strange red liquid pooling at the bottom of the coffin. It wasn't blood. Tests showed it was sewage water that had leaked in over centuries, mixing with the decay. The smell was overwhelming. The mystery, however, remained. Who were they? Why were 3 individuals buried together in such a large, expensive coffin? And why no inscriptions? In ancient Egypt, even modest burials were rich in symbolism. Hieroglyphs, names, prayers to guide the dead through the afterlife. This sarcophagus had nothing. No identifiers, no gods, just weight and darkness. The bones belonged to 2 men and 1 woman. They showed signs of trauma, possibly from battle. One skull had a large hole, maybe from a weapon. But there was no consensus. Some suggested they were part of a family. Others thought they were victims of a hasty, hidden burial. DNA testing was attempted, but degradation made results inconclusive. Radiocarbon dating placed the burial around the early Ptolemaic period, roughly 300–100 BCE. But without inscriptions, even that timeline is tentative. The coffin itself tells part of the story. Black granite wasn't common in Alexandria. It had to be quarried from distant Aswan and transported north. Whoever commissioned it had power, resources, and a reason to keep it anonymous. Was it a burial stripped of identity on purpose? A punishment? A secret? To this day, no one has claimed a definitive answer. The coffin was eventually moved to a secure museum facility. The red liquid was drained and disposed of, and the 3 skeletons remain under study, nameless. Sometimes what's missing is what lingers. The city above has changed. Buildings rise, roads shift, people forget. But deep underground, sealed in darkness, the coffin waited. Not for discovery, perhaps, just for time to pass. Scattered across the rugged highlands and coastal cliffs of Scotland lie the ruined remains of ancient hillforts. Rough stone walls, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. But some of these forts hide a secret locked into their very structure. Their stones have melted. These are the vitrified forts. Over 60 confirmed sites where parts of the walls have been subjected to such intense heat that the stones, partially liquefied, fuse together like glass. This is not a metaphor. It's a geological anomaly. The process of vitrification requires temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. Conditions difficult to achieve even with modern technology, let alone during the Iron Age, when most of these forts were built between 700 BCE and 300 CE. The phenomenon was first documented in the 18th century, and for over 2 centuries, researchers have debated what it means. Was this a deliberate process? A method to reinforce walls by fusing them? Or was it an act of destruction, fortresses burned by invaders or ritual fire? Experimental archaeology has tried to replicate the effect using timber, peat and bellows. Some success has been achieved, but only under highly controlled conditions and only on small scales. None of the reconstructions come close to the sheer volume of vitrified stone found at sites like Dun Mac Snearchan or Tap o Noth. That particular site, excavated in recent years, revealed a massive fortified enclosure at the summit of a mountain. Its walls not only vitrified, but constructed with a complexity that suggests central planning and large-scale labor. And yet there are no written records from the people who built them, no inscriptions, no myths passed down, nothing but melted stone and earth. Some archaeologists suggest these were ceremonial burnings, forts ritually destroyed when abandoned. Others argue the vitrification was unintentional, caused by siege fires or lightning strikes. But those explanations rarely satisfy. Why would so many forts, scattered across different regions, show similar signs of intense, sustained heat? One theory even proposes the technique was known and then forgotten, a lost method of fortification abandoned when it proved too labor-intensive or dangerous. Another idea, more fringe but persistent, posits that the vitrification was a display of power, an ancient form of shock and awe. What is clear is that these walls were not simply built, they were transformed. Stone, reshaped by fire, locked into forms that defy casual explanation. They are relics of an age that burned with purpose, but left no record of why. No other sculpture from ancient Iberia has sparked more debate, or more fascination, than the Dama de Elche. Discovered by chance in 1897 on the l'Alcúdia estate near Elche, in southeastern Spain, the figure was unearthed by workers clearing a field among the scattered ruins of an ancient Iberian settlement. At first, it appeared to be just another piece of buried rubble. But what rose from the soil was a limestone bust of a woman, perfectly preserved and astonishingly lifelike. Carved around the 4th century BCE, possibly earlier, the bust stands out not only for its realism, but for its striking features. Finely modeled lips, sharply defined cheekbones, and an elaborate headdress consisting of 2 large circular coils flanking her face, believed to represent either ceremonial attire or a status symbol. The details of her garment, jewelry, and the precision of the carving are so advanced that some early scholars questioned whether it could even be Iberian in origin. The sculpture was soon named the Dama de Elche, and from the beginning she defied classification. Her style seemed too refined for local Iberian art, leading many to believe she was influenced by, or perhaps created by, Phoenician, Greek or even Carthaginian artisans, all of whom were known to trade and settle along the Mediterranean coast of Iberia. Others argue she reflects a uniquely Iberian aesthetic, a glimpse into a sophisticated local culture whose artifacts were lost or yet to be discovered. Her purpose remains equally enigmatic. In 1948, an analysis revealed a hollow cavity at the back of her neck, suggesting she may have served as a funerary urn, possibly to hold cremated remains. If true, she wasn't just a sculpture, but part of a ritual, intimately tied to death and memory. This interpretation positions her as more than a noblewoman or deity. She could have been a spiritual intermediary or a vessel of ancestral reverence. Over time, the Dama became a national symbol of pre-Roman Iberian identity, and her image has appeared in everything from museum exhibits to postage stamps. Yet key questions persist. Was she a portrait of a real individual or a symbolic representation of an idealized figure? If she held ashes, whose remains did she guard? Why does no similar statue exist elsewhere in the region? The site where she was found has since yielded other Iberian ruins, including walls, coins, and fragments of pottery, but none match the refinement or mystery of the Dama herself. She stands alone, both in craftsmanship and cultural ambiguity. The discovery wasn't glamorous. No golden mask, no towering monument, just a flat, dark stone pulled from the soil of a burial mound in Tennessee. It might have gone unnoticed forever, a relic buried with copper bracelets and bone. But decades later, it began to speak in a language no one expected, and the controversy hasn't stopped since. At first, the markings were interpreted as Cherokee. It made sense. The mound belonged to the Hopewell tradition, and the Cherokee were known to inhabit the region. The stone was catalogued and largely forgotten, a footnote in early American archaeology. But nearly a century later, in 1970, a Semitic languages scholar named Cyrus Gordon noticed something strange. The characters didn't match the Cherokee syllabary at all. Instead, they bore a striking resemblance to Paleo-Hebrew, an early form of Hebrew used around 2,000 years ago. The inscription, when reversed, appeared to read, "For the Jews." That single reinterpretation shattered the stone's obscurity and thrust it into a global debate. Could Semitic people have crossed the Atlantic in ancient times? Was this stone proof of pre-Columbian contact between the Old World and the Americas? Proponents argued that the burial context, deep within a sealed mound, meant the artifact had to be authentic. If it had been planted, how could it have ended up buried beneath copper items and human remains? The implications were enormous. If genuine, the Bat Creek stone would force a rewrite of early American history, suggesting contact between Middle Eastern cultures and Native Americans centuries before Columbus. But critics weren't convinced. In the 1990s, researchers noticed that the stone's inscription closely resembled a Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, printed in an 1870s reference book, published before the excavation. The match was too precise. It seemed likely that whoever carved the Bat Creek stone had copied it from that exact chart. Worse, questions began to surface about the Smithsonian's own methods at the time. Cyrus Thomas wasn't an archaeologist by modern standards. Excavation techniques were crude and documentation was often minimal. Could Thomas, or someone close to him, have planted the stone, or simply misunderstood what he found? The Smithsonian quietly shifted its stance, eventually listing the Bat Creek stone as a likely forgery. Mainstream scholars now regard it as a 19th century hoax, either deliberate or accidental. Still, the mystery endures. The stone resides in a museum housed in glass, watched by eyes that see different things. To some, it is evidence of forgotten voyages and hidden truths. To others, it is a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in science we sometimes see what we want to believe. When archaeologists first unearthed swords inscribed with the word Ulfbert, they thought they had found the work of a master. What they had actually uncovered was a centuries-old riddle. These Viking-era weapons, discovered in graves and riverbeds across Europe, date from roughly 800 to 1000 CE, yet they were forged with a level of metallurgical purity that should have been impossible at the time. More than 170 Ulfbert swords have been found to date, many unearthed in Norway, Germany, and other parts of northern and central Europe. While their exact number varies depending on how one defines a true Ulfbert, they all share a common trait: an inscription on the blade, usually in Latin script, reading Ulfbert with slight variations. The origin of this name remains uncertain. Was Ulfbert a single swordsmith, a family, a workshop, or a brand name passed from one generation to another? The real mystery lies not in the name, but in the steel. Most early medieval swords were made from bloomery iron, an inconsistent impure metal prone to cracking and bending. But metallurgical analysis of several genuine Ulfbert blades revealed something astonishing: a remarkably pure form of steel containing up to 1.2% carbon and showing no traces of slag, something virtually unheard of in medieval Europe. This kind of metal, known today as high-carbon steel, requires controlled temperatures of at least 1,500 degrees Celsius, a feat believed to be beyond the reach of European technology at the time. This quality allowed Ulfbert swords to be lighter, stronger, and more flexible than their contemporaries. They could hold a sharper edge and withstand powerful blows. In battle, an Ulfbert blade wasn't just a weapon, it was an advantage. So how were they made? Some scholars suggest the steel may have come from the East, possibly through Islamic trade routes from Persia or Central Asia, where crucible steel techniques, like the famed Wootz steel of India, were already in use. If so, it implies that Viking or Frankish swordsmiths had access to far-reaching trade networks and knew how to work imported materials with extreme precision. But not all Ulfberts were created equal. Later imitations emerged, blades with similar inscriptions but made with inferior iron. These fake Ulfberts, likely mass-produced to capitalize on the brand's reputation, lacked the structural integrity of the originals. This suggests the name had become something more, a symbol of quality, power, and prestige, much like a medieval trademark. What's also striking is the spread of these swords. Many were found buried with high-status individuals, chieftains, warriors, possibly even mercenaries in the service of Christian or Islamic lords. Others were discovered in rivers, possibly ritually deposited as offerings or lost in battle. Their wide geographic distribution shows how highly valued and widely recognized these swords had become. To this day, no workshop has been definitively linked to the original Ulfbert blades. No records detail how they were made. The process, it seems, was a closely guarded secret, possibly passed down through generations and lost over time. By the 11th century, the true Ulfbert swords vanished from the archaeological record. The technology, it seems, disappeared with them. They remain a historical contradiction, evidence of a skill set that shouldn't have existed when it did. Were the Ulfbert swordsmiths geniuses ahead of their time, recipients of knowledge passed along ancient trade routes, or simply the inheritors of a now-forgotten tradition? Whatever the answer, they remind us that not all innovation leaves a trace. Windswept fields and ancient burial grounds mark the Swedish island of Gotland, but among them stands something far less understood, a stone carved over 1,000 years ago. Known as the Shugborough image stone, it rises just over 1.7 meters tall and is covered with a series of etched figures. A rider on horseback, a large ship with curved prow, intertwined animals, and symbols now lost to memory. It was discovered in the late 19th century, lying face down on a farm, repurposed as a threshold stone. No one knew what it was, only that it didn't belong to the ground it was buried in. The stone is dated to the Viking Age, most likely between 700 and 900 CE, and is one of the finest examples of Gotland's image stones, monuments unique to the island. But while others show stylized scenes of warriors or serpents, the Shugborough stone is more enigmatic. The rider is unusually large, depicted mid-stride as if arriving or departing. The ship carries a crew but no battle. Above them looms what appears to be a mythical animal, flanked by looping bands that may be symbolic or merely decorative. What story is this stone trying to tell? Some scholars believe the stone depicts a journey to the afterlife. In Norse mythology, fallen warriors are carried to Valhalla, sometimes by horse, sometimes by ship. Is the rider entering the realm of the gods? Others suggest the scene is more personal, a tribute to a chieftain, a warrior, or a loved one lost at sea. But there are no runes, no inscriptions, no names carved into the surface. Why leave such a detailed scene and omit the voice behind it? The ship, too, raises questions. Viking ships were often symbols of prestige and power, associated with both life and death. Funeral ships were real and symbolic, buried with the dead or painted into memorials. On the En-Gedi stone, the ship seems to rise into another realm, suggesting that this is no ordinary voyage. Could it be an allegory, a mythic crossing, or a real journey retold as legend? Some interpretations go further. The size of the rider compared to the ship has led to speculation that this is Odin himself, arriving at Valhalla. Others argue that the stone blends multiple traditions, pre-Christian and Norse, into a symbolic fusion. Could it reflect a time of transition when old beliefs and new gods were fighting for the same space in stone? Despite decades of study, no single reading of the En-Gedi stone has prevailed. It exists between meanings, between myth and memory. It is art, but also grave marker, story, but also symbol. Perhaps it was meant to be interpreted only by those who knew the man it honored. How many meanings can one stone hold, and how many were already lost when the carving was first set into earth? He was first seen in the mid-19th century, walking alone along the country roads of Connecticut and New York, always in the same direction, always at the same pace. His path formed a loop, 585 kilometers long, through forests, past farms and between towns. He stopped at the same places, spoke little beyond polite nods, and wore a suit made entirely of hand-stitched leather. To those who came to expect his monthly visits, he became known only as the Leatherman. No one ever knew his name. He never revealed his origin, his language, or his reason. He spoke in brief, broken English and fragments of French. He accepted food and tobacco but refused shelter. In winter, he trudged through snow in his heavy outfit. In summer, he baked under its weight. He slept in caves and rock shelters. More than 20 of them have since been identified across his circuit, many still referred to as Leatherman caves. Over the decades, his presence became so regular that townspeople would leave meals for him on porches, certain he would pass by again within the same week, year after year. He died in 1889, found in one of his caves near Ossining, New York. His body was discovered by a local farmer, lying on a bed of leaves, his leather garments still intact. With no known relatives, he was buried in a pauper's grave in Sparta Cemetery, beneath a simple stone that read, "Final Resting Place of the Leatherman, 1889. But the mystery didn't end there. Over the years, the Leatherman's life drew the attention of researchers, folklorists, and amateur historians. Some speculated he was a French-Canadian displaced by trauma. Others believed he had suffered a breakdown or exile following personal tragedy. A few theorized he was fleeing political unrest in Europe or religious persecution. Still, nothing was proven. He left no letters, no journals, no explanation. In 2011, more than a century after his death, researchers from the Connecticut State Archaeologist's Office exhumed his grave, hoping that modern forensic science might finally give him a name. But when the coffin was opened, they found almost nothing. The wooden box had decayed. The remains had disintegrated. All that was recovered were a few coffin nails, a leather fragment, and soil. DNA testing was impossible. Alongside his body had been buried a small set of hand-forged tools, simple but precise, a sharpening stone, pieces of wire, metal scraps shaped into hooks. These objects were preserved and analyzed, showing wear consistent with years of maintenance and use. It became clear that the Leatherman didn't just wear leather. He had made and repaired it himself, crafting his clothing and gear from salvaged materials, living by a knowledge no longer common in industrial America. Though no answers emerged from the exhumation, public interest grew. His grave was moved slightly to meet state regulations, and a new marker was placed, one that no longer claims to know what lies beneath. In a country where identity is everything, the Leatherman defied it. He walked without flag or story, untouched by war, politics, or wealth. His route remains mapped and marked by others, but the man himself has vanished, not into legend, but into quiet, unresolvable fact. On the evening of November 23, 1953, a U.S. Air Force F-89 Scorpion interceptor took off from Kinross Air Force Base, Michigan. Its mission, to investigate an unidentified radar contact moving over Lake Superior near the U.S.-Canada border. In the cockpit were First Lieutenant Felix Monclar, the pilot, and Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson, the radar operator. Within minutes, they were locked onto their target, racing toward it at high speed. Moments later, their aircraft disappeared, without a trace. The radar operators at Kinross watched as the blip representing Monclar's jet closed in on the unknown object. Then, something inexplicable happened. The two radar blips merged into one, and just like that, Monclar's aircraft vanished from the screen. Controllers tried desperately to re-establish contact, but there was only silence. A massive search operation was launched, scouring the icy waters of Lake Superior for any sign of the F-89 or its pilots. No wreckage was found. No distress call was ever sent. It was as if the jet had been swallowed whole by the sky. The US Air Force quickly provided an official explanation. Moncler had likely suffered vertigo, lost control, and crashed into the lake. But this didn't explain why no debris or bodies were ever recovered. More strangely, initial reports suggested that Moncler's aircraft had been chasing a Canadian military plane, an explanation that the Canadian government outright denied. There were no Canadian aircraft in the area that night. This only fueled speculation that Moncler had intercepted something else entirely, something the military didn't want to acknowledge. UFO researchers latched onto the case, suggesting that the object on radar was not another aircraft, but something unknown, something Moncler got too close to. Some even speculated that the two radar blips merging meant that his jet had been taken, whether by accident or by design. Decades later, in 2006, a team of divers claimed to have discovered the wreckage of an F-89 at the bottom of Lake Superior. However, the location and details of the aircraft were never confirmed, and the mystery remains. Whether Moncler was the victim of a tragic accident, an encounter with an unknown craft, or something the government covered up, his disappearance remains one of the most chilling aviation mysteries of the 20th century. But while Moncler's case left behind only questions, some disappearances offer eerie clues. In 1980, beneath the bustling streets of East Talpiot, Jerusalem, construction workers stumbled upon a discovery destined to ignite fierce controversy and scholarly debate. Revealed was a modest limestone tomb, unremarkable at first glance, but hiding 10 ossuaries, small ornate bone boxes common in ancient Jewish burial customs. Yet the inscriptions on these particular ossuaries transformed this simple tomb into a historical lightning rod. They bore familiar names including Yeshua bar Yosef, Mariamne, Maria, and Yosef, echoing names closely associated with Jesus of Nazareth and his immediate family. The implications were staggering. Could this be the family tomb of one of history's most influential figures? If authenticated, it could reshape the foundation of Christianity itself. But as quickly as excitement arose, skepticism followed. Scholars rushed to decode these cryptic inscriptions, their translations sparking intense ongoing debates. Were these merely common names, coincidentally echoing biblical figures, or was this a truly extraordinary historical link? Detailed analyses showed the ossuaries dated precisely to the 1st century CE, aligning perfectly with the era of Jesus' lifetime. Yet critics swiftly noted that the names inscribed were exceedingly common in ancient Judea, casting doubt on any direct link to the biblical family. Adding complexity, statistical studies have shown that while individually these names were commonplace, their combined occurrence in one tomb is exceptionally rare, intensifying debates around the tomb's significance. Controversy deepened further in 2007, when filmmakers claimed DNA testing suggested a familial connection between the ossuaries labeled Yeshua and Mariamne, igniting intense debate over potential implications about Jesus' life and relationships. Historians, theologians, and archaeologists fiercely contested these findings, some dismissing them outright, others demanding deeper analysis. The scholarly community remains divided, the tomb carefully balancing on the delicate line between historical revelation and sensationalist interpretation. Even now, the Talpiot tomb stands quietly sealed, protected beneath layers of modern construction, yet it remains a potent source of debate and curiosity. Its ossuaries, carefully preserved and studied, symbolize history's complexity, proof that sometimes artifacts challenge not just historical timelines, but deeply held beliefs themselves. It began with a shimmer, an echo of gold that traveled across oceans and twisted into obsession. The Spanish conquistadors called it El Dorado, the Gilded One, a city or kingdom, hidden somewhere in the New World, where the walls gleamed, the rivers glittered, and the very soil promised fortune. Driven by hunger for riches and eternal glory, explorers plunged into unmapped jungles, scaled Andean peaks, and died in swamps and ravines, chasing a city that shimmered just out of reach. But the myth of El Dorado didn't begin as a place. It began as a ritual. Among the Muisca people of what is now Colombia, there was a tradition unlike any other. When a new ruler rose to power, he would coat himself in fine gold dust, transforming into a living statue of sunlight. Accompanied by priests and nobles, he would sail to the center of Lake Guatavita, and there, beneath the gaze of his people, He would offer jewels, gold, and sacred objects into the depths as a tribute to the gods. The Muisca did not see gold as currency. It was a symbol of cosmic power, a sacred medium between mortals and the divine. Spanish chroniclers, hearing fragments of this ritual from indigenous informants, misunderstood or perhaps reimagined the story. The man became a city, the city became a kingdom, and soon El Dorado was no longer a ceremony but a place of impossible riches waiting to be taken. Expeditions followed. In 1531, Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada pushed deep into the Andes in search of it, founding Bogotá along the way. In 1541, Francisco de Orellana sailed the Amazon in pursuit of golden kingdoms, giving the river its name after a clash with fierce female warriors, reminiscent of Greek Amazons. Even Sir Walter Raleigh, a century later, ventured into Guyana, convinced that the city lay just beyond the next bend in the river. None found it. Many never returned. But the truth, as it turns out, was never hidden. It was simply misunderstood. In the early 20th century, attempts to drain Lake Guatavita revealed golden artifacts at its bottom. Nose rings, figurines, ornaments, all confirming the sacred offerings once made by the Muisca. One of the most iconic artifacts, the Muisca raft, discovered in a nearby cave, depicts the exact ritual in dazzling gold. A chieftain, enshrined in regalia, flanked by priests, aboard a raft bound for the lake's center. No golden city was ever built, but the gold was real, the ritual was real, and the memory endured, reshaped by imperial greed into something both grander and more tragic. El Dorado was never a place. It was a moment repeated across generations, where a man became divine and gold returned to the earth. It started with a curve, an arc of stone buried in the soil near Amphipolis in northern Greece. At first, it seemed unremarkable, but in 2012, as archaeologists dug deeper, the circle expanded. The structure was too large for a home, too deliberate for a shrine. Bit by bit, it revealed itself as a tomb, one that defied expectations, not for its contents, but for its scale. What they had found was not ordinary. The Khater tomb, as it came to be known, is the largest burial monument ever discovered in Greece. Its perimeter wall alone spans nearly 500 meters. Built with carefully cut limestone and marble, the structure was clearly meant to impress or to hide. It dates back to the late 4th century BCE, placing it in the aftermath of Alexander the Great's death. The entrance was flanked by two headless sphinxes. Inside, the passage opened into a chamber guarded by two nearly intact caryatids, stone statues of women with solemn expressions and flowing robes. Further in, a mosaic floor depicted the abduction of Persephone by Hades, a symbol of death and transition. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the symbolism unmistakable. But who was buried here? At the heart of the tomb, archaeologists uncovered human remains, fragmented bones belonging to 5 individuals, including a woman over 60, a man in his 30s, and a newborn. They also found bones from a horse. No inscriptions named the dead, no treasure confirmed their rank. But the scale of the monument suggested a figure, or family, of immense importance. Speculation spread fast. Was this the tomb of Olympias, Alexander the Great's mother, or perhaps Roxana, his Persian wife? Others proposed his close general Hephaestion, or even Alexander himself, whose burial place remains one of antiquity's enduring mysteries. But the evidence was never conclusive. The materials and style did connect the tomb to elite Macedonian circles, yet the scattered remains made identification difficult. No royal seal, no written name, just stone, design, and silence. And there was something else. The tomb seemed unfinished. Certain sections were rough, as if abandoned mid-construction. Had the plans changed? Was the burial rushed or interrupted? The Khater tomb reveals as much through its grandeur as through its gaps. A monument meant to endure, but with no clear story to anchor it. Even the art raises questions. Why Persephone? Was the tomb meant as a message to the living or a guide to the dead? Today, the site is partially restored, with replicas of its original statues displayed for visitors. But the identity of the main occupant, or occupants, remains unknown. A tomb this vast was never meant for obscurity, and yet time has erased its names. It began with a shovel striking hollow stone. In August 1742, a worker digging a hole for a new bench post in Royston, Hertfordshire, uncovered a vertical shaft. Lowering himself down with a rope, he entered a circular underground chamber, cut directly into the chalk bedrock beneath the street. What he found inside was neither empty nor ordinary. The walls were covered in carvings. The chamber is roughly 2.5 meters wide and over 5 meters deep. The carvings, etched into the soft chalk, depict saints, knights, and strange, possibly pagan figures. There's St. Catherine with her wheel, St. Lawrence with his gridiron, and a crude crucifixion scene. But between them are other symbols: stars, crosses, floral patterns, and hooded figures that don't appear in any Christian canon. There are no inscriptions, no dates, and no clear narrative. Just stone, shadow, and silence. The age of the carvings remains uncertain. Some scholars believe they were made in the 14th century. Others argue for a 17th century origin. The most persistent theory links the chamber to the Knights Templar, a medieval military order dissolved in the early 1300s, under accusations of heresy and secret rites. The blend of Christian iconography with esoteric symbols in Royston Cave has fueled this speculation for centuries, yet no definitive proof has ever surfaced. Some say the cave was a Templar meeting place, hidden in plain sight beneath a crossroads. Others suggest it was a hermit's cell, a private chapel, or even a secret initiation chamber. What complicates things further is the chamber's design. It's not a natural cave, but a deliberately hollowed cylinder, with a niche that may have held an altar and footholds carved into the shaft for access. In the 19th century, parts of the cave were cleaned and even altered, damaging portions of the original artwork. What remains today is both too much and not enough. Too much to be coincidence, too little to explain. No tools were found, no records of its construction, no mention in town archives. It's as though the cave was never meant to be known, only rediscovered. And even now, under modern lights, the figures carved into the wall seem to wait. Their outlines are worn, their meanings obscure, but their presence lingers, as if they still serve a forgotten purpose, long after their keepers vanished. Among the traffic-clogged avenues of modern-day Mexico City, few would guess that beneath the layers of asphalt and concrete lies the remains of one of Mesoamerica's earliest urban centers, a site that predates the Aztecs, the Maya, and even Teotihuacan. Its name is Cuicuilco, and at its heart stands a structure unlike any other pyramid in the region, massive, circular, and partly buried beneath a hardened flow of volcanic lava. The Cuicuilco Pyramid, located near Lake Texcoco's former shores, is estimated to have been built between 800 BCE and 600 BCE, making it one of the oldest known ceremonial centers in central Mexico. The structure, over 20 meters tall and 110 meters in diameter, was constructed with layered volcanic stone and earth, arranged in a circular platform topped with a now ruined temple. Unlike the stepped rectangular pyramids found in later Mesoamerican cultures, Cuicuilco's rounded shape is unique, suggesting either a distinct cultural tradition or a long-lost architectural influence. When the Zittel volcano erupted sometime around 245–315 CE, it unleashed a wave of lava that buried much of Cuicuilco under several meters of molten rock. The city was largely abandoned, and much of its history, culture, and influence vanished beneath the hardened basalt. It is only through modern excavations that archaeologists have begun to piece together what this city once was and what it might have represented. Artifacts found at the site suggest a sophisticated society. Tools, ceramics, and sculptures point to complex rituals and trade networks. The layout of the city, with its ceremonial spaces, altars, and large plazas, indicates organized urban planning, possibly even a centralized political structure. Some have speculated that Cuicuilco was the first major city in the Valley of Mexico, its design influencing later cultures long after it was buried. The circular shape of the pyramid has invited theories that stretch beyond archaeology. Some see it as a solar observatory, aligned with astronomical events. Others view it as a symbol of cyclical time, a structure embodying a worldview distinct from the later linear cosmology of the Maya or Aztec. More fringe theorists have speculated on external influences, citing architectural similarities to South American or even Old World cultures, though no conclusive evidence supports these ideas. Even today, the pyramid's full extent remains unknown. Much of it still lies under lava fields, and further excavation is limited by the surrounding urban sprawl. It remains a partial shadow of what it once was, preserved by destruction. What civilization built this temple? How did they rise to such prominence, only to vanish so completely that even their name is lost to history? And if Cuicuilco had not been buried in fire, would the Valley of Mexico's dominant power have taken a different form? High on the limestone slopes of southern Cyprus lie the ruins of one of the oldest known human settlements in Europe, Khater. This Neolithic village, inhabited as early as 7000 BCE, was once a bustling hub of stone houses, narrow pathways, and terraced farms. But among the remnants of everyday life, pottery, tools, bones, archaeologists uncovered something else. Thousands of nearly perfect stone balls. Most are small enough to fit in a hand. Others are heavier, shaped with surprising precision. Some are smooth, others grooved or pitted. They were carved from local rock, chalk, limestone, diabase. Many were found scattered between houses, clustered in odd arrangements or buried under floors. But nowhere in the site's long timeline, stretching nearly 2 millennia, do they come with clear instructions. What were they for? Some researchers have suggested they were tools, perhaps used in food preparation or construction. Others believe they served as weights, possibly in primitive balance systems. A few larger ones may have functioned as projectiles, but none of these theories fit the full picture. The sheer quantity, the variability in size and finish, and their odd placements around the site make it hard to pin them down to any single use. One of the more intriguing patterns lies in their deliberate grouping. In some homes, multiple balls were found arranged in distinct configurations, 3 in a line or in a tight triangle, sometimes near doorways or hearths. Could they have been symbolic? Were they protective charms, status markers, or ritual objects? No two houses share the exact same setup, yet the presence of stone balls is consistent across the entire village. The people of Khater left no written records, no petroglyphs or markings that might explain their customs. What little we know comes from excavation and inference. They built their homes with rounded walls, buried their dead beneath floors, and created a tightly organized, fortified settlement. Everything about them suggests structure, purpose, control. And yet, these stone balls resist explanation, like an untranslatable phrase in the language of their lives. The mystery deepens when one considers their sudden disappearance. Later, Neolithic communities in Cyprus, including those that succeeded the Khater culture, show no similar use of stone spheres. It was not a tradition that evolved or faded gradually, it simply ended. Why these objects appear in such abundance only to vanish entirely remains unanswered. In recent years, the balls have drawn comparisons to similar finds elsewhere, Scotland's carved stone spheres, for instance, but no direct link has ever been established. The idea of universal prehistoric symbols is seductive, but risky. Cultures separated by oceans and centuries may share form, but not meaning. Today, the stone balls of Khater are locked away in museum drawers or laid out under glass, catalogued but not understood. To hold one is to feel the weight of something deeply human and completely unknown. A shape repeated so many times must have meant something. But what? Beneath the arid plains of southern Peru lies a culture that saw death not as an end, but as a tool. Among the many wonders of the Nazca civilization, famed for its massive geoglyphs etched across the desert, there is another, darker legacy: trophy heads, skulls deliberately modified, pierced, and sometimes still bearing flesh when buried. For years, archaeologists debated their meaning. Were they war trophies, sacred offerings, or something more symbolic? Known to the Nazca as early as 100 BCE to 800 CE, these severed human heads were modified with drilled holes in the forehead, often carefully cleaned and sometimes adorned with rope or decorative elements. The hole wasn't random, it was expertly placed, allowing the skull to be strung and carried, likely around the waist or neck. Some show signs of flesh still present when buried, suggesting they were not long-dead ancestors but fresh victims. Many of these heads were discovered in the region's desert cemeteries, particularly in sites like Kahuachi, a major ceremonial center. Excavations revealed rows of isolated skulls, buried separately from full skeletons. Some were found with remnants of hair or facial tattoos intact. Others bore evidence of post-mortem modification, cut marks, drilled bone, and signs of deliberate care. At first glance, the practice seemed rooted in warfare. Captured enemies beheaded and displayed as trophies to showcase victory. This idea was reinforced by the martial imagery in Nazca pottery, which frequently depicts warriors holding severed heads. But a deeper look complicates the narrative. Many of the skulls analyzed through DNA and isotopic testing belonged not to foreigners or outsiders, but to Nazca people themselves. Some were even children. Others showed no signs of violent trauma at death. This suggests the heads may not have been taken in battle, but rather ritually prepared. possibly from willing participants, sacrificial victims or selected individuals within the community. The heads also played a role in agricultural and fertility rituals. Some were buried near fields or shrines. Others appear in ceremonial contexts, possibly representing ancestral spirits or intermediaries with the gods. The Nazca, like many Andean cultures, believed the dead remained active in the world of the living, and these skulls may have been vessels of spiritual power. Notably, the trophy heads weren't treated carelessly. Some were painted or wrapped with care. Others had cords threaded through their skulls in elaborate ways, suggesting they were carried during rituals, displayed in processions, or even used as sacred objects. One theory posits that these skulls were symbols of transformation, a literal separation of spirit from body, allowing the head to serve as a conduit for divine communication. The act of severing and preserving the head wasn't just violent, it was ritualized and intentional, part of a cosmology where life, death, and the earth were intimately intertwined. To modern eyes, the practice seems macabre, but in the Nazca worldview it may have been an act of reverence, of unlocking sacred potential through death. Even today, the true purpose of the trophy heads remains uncertain. Were they prisoners of war, sacrifices, ancestral offerings, or all at once? The evidence refuses to settle. But they remain, silent, decorated, drilled for display. Central Colombia's highlands hold many traces of ancient life, but none quite like the field of carved stones near Villa de Leyva, once feared, later studied, still unexplained. Locals once called it El Infiernito, Little Hell, a name born of colonial discomfort, not ancient purpose. The Spaniards who stumbled upon it saw phallic shapes and declared it a site of pagan ritual. What they didn't see, or perhaps refused to, was its quiet precision. Long before Spanish conquest, this site served as a sacred space for the Muisca, one of the great civilizations of pre-Columbian South America. But archaeological evidence suggests its origins run even deeper, possibly tied to Pre-Muisca cultures as early as 800 BCE. At its center stand over 30 carved stone pillars, some aligned to mark the solstices and equinoxes. When the sun rises or sets on certain days of the year, shadows fall in exact patterns between them. Was this a temple, a calendar, or both? The Muisca are often overshadowed by the Inca, but they developed their own sophisticated systems of astronomy, trade, and governance. They used lunar and solar cycles to plan agriculture, ceremonies, and seasonal movements. El Infiernito may have been a physical embodiment of that knowledge, a place where time itself could be tracked in stone. But why has so much of their intellectual legacy faded, leaving only alignments and silence? Among the pillars are several upright stones interpreted as phallic symbols. These may have represented fertility, regeneration, or cosmic balance. Spanish chroniclers recoiled at them, declaring the site heretical and demonic. Some of the stones were toppled, others buried. How much was destroyed before it could ever be understood? Excavations have also revealed graves and funerary artifacts near the complex, suggesting that El Infiernito may have also served as a ceremonial burial site. Did the Muisca believe that the cosmos and the afterlife were one continuous cycle, each death part of a larger celestial order? Or were the alignments a means of guiding the spirit after death, just as they guided crops in life? Despite its name, there's nothing infernal about the place, only design and memory. It is astronomy carved into earth, a sacred map of time. Yet unlike the Inca or Maya, the Muisca left behind no codices, no carved histories. Their knowledge was oral, lost when their world was violently interrupted. What remains is stone that still marks the sky, a field where light and shadow still move in rhythm, just as they did 1,000 years ago. Who first stood here, watching the solstice sun land perfectly between two pillars, and what did they believe they were witnessing? In the summer of 1971, as Cold War tensions pushed China to expand its network of air raid shelters, a crew of laborers dug into a hillside near the city of Changsha in Hunan province. Their shovels struck an unusual barrier, dense layers of white clay and charcoal, precisely arranged in alternating sections. As they removed the topsoil, they revealed a man-made mound unlike any other. The authorities were called. Within days, a team from the Hunan Provincial Museum and state archaeologists had secured the site. What they uncovered beneath the earth would rewrite the possibilities of preservation. The tomb belonged to Xin Jui, the Marchioness of Dai, wife of a local nobleman during the Western Han dynasty. Her burial chamber, later identified as Tomb Number 1 at Mawangdui, had remained sealed for over 2,000 years. Workers entered through a narrow trench and found a deep vertical shaft leading to a wooden structure lined with thick lacquered walls. Inside were 4 nested coffins, each one more elaborate, until they reached the core, a pitch-dark, airless chamber filled with scentless fluid and soft silk. When they opened the final coffin, what lay inside stunned even the most experienced members of the team. The body of Lady Di had not decomposed. Her skin was still elastic, her veins still held traces of blood, her limbs could still bend. The preservation was so complete that modern physicians performed a full autopsy, discovering she had suffered from high cholesterol, arteriosclerosis, and a likely fatal heart attack. Melon seeds in her stomach revealed her last meal. More than 1,000 artifacts were found alongside her. Among them, an ornate silk banner illustrating her journey to the afterlife, a cosmetic case filled with oils, combs, and powders, lacquered trays of food sealed in airtight vessels, and tightly folded silk robes still patterned with intricate dye. Musical instruments, including a 7-stringed chin, were stored nearby, and small figurines hinted at court life, servants, and ritual observances. Every item had been placed deliberately, not just for display but to accompany her beyond death. The tomb's construction was a marvel of ancient engineering. Archaeologists believe the alternating clay and charcoal layers created a vacuum-sealed environment. Combined with the absence of oxygen, constant humidity, and the mysterious reddish embalming fluid, the conditions halted decay entirely. No modern method has replicated the results, although other Han tombs exist, including those of her husband and son nearby. None have yielded a body so well preserved. This extraordinary effort reflects early Han beliefs in life after death, physical continuity, and bodily wholeness. The dynasty embraced notions of spiritual ascent and longevity, and the material culture of Lady Di's tomb shows a concerted attempt to merge luxury, ritual, and science. Her body was not only meant to rest, it was meant to endure. The discovery, announced at the height of China's Cultural Revolution, quickly drew international attention. Scientists from China, Japan, and the West requested access. Museums prepared exhibitions. For a time, Lady Di became a symbol of ancient Chinese sophistication, drawing enormous crowds to the Hunan Provincial Museum, where her nested coffins and burial goods are still displayed. The body itself remains under tight conservation, visible only to specialists in controlled conditions. Exposure to air could undo what 2,000 years had miraculously preserved. Even today, Lady Di remains a scientific puzzle. No bacteria were found in her body. No known preservative matches the fluid that encased her. Forensic studies continue, but the conditions that created her state have never been reproduced. She is not embalmed. She is not mummified. She is simply whole. She was not an empress. She did not rule, yet her tomb surpassed the grandeur of kings, not in gold or conquest, but in defying death itself. Few ghost ships are as unsettling as the MV Joyita, a 43-meter-long merchant vessel that vanished in the South Pacific in 1955, only to be found drifting aimlessly, completely abandoned. The lifeboats were missing. The radio was tuned to an emergency frequency. Supplies were untouched. The 25 passengers and crew were gone without a trace. The Joyita left Apia, Samoa, on October 3, 1955, bound for the Tokelau Islands, a short voyage that should have taken 2 days. Aboard was an experienced captain, Thomas H. Miller, along with traders, government officials, and medical personnel. The ship was overdue by October 5th, but no distress calls had been received. A full search was launched, yet for weeks the Pacific remained silent. Then, on November 10, 1955, a British aircraft spotted the missing vessel, adrift 1,000 kilometers off course near Fiji. When rescuers boarded the ship, what they found was deeply unsettling. The engine was dead. The radio was tuned to an emergency distress channel, but no calls had been made. The ship wasn't sinking. In fact, its design made it nearly unsinkable, yet the crew had seemingly abandoned it anyway. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no bullet holes. Just an empty, broken vessel left to the mercy of the waves. And then came the most haunting detail. The ship's logbook was missing. The navigation equipment, gone. The lifeboats, cut away. It was as if someone or something had systematically erased the final moments of the voyage. Even more disturbing, a doctor's medical bag was left open, suggesting an injury or illness before the evacuation. But if someone had been hurt, why abandon the ship, especially one that was still afloat? Theories flooded in. Some believed pirates attacked, Yet nothing valuable was stolen. Others whispered of Japanese holdouts, soldiers from World War II still hiding on remote islands. There were those who claimed the Joyita encountered something unnatural, an unknown force lurking in the vast Pacific. More rational minds suggested a leak may have caused panic, leading the crew to abandon ship too soon. Yet the vessel was found fully capable of staying afloat. If the crew left voluntarily, why was nothing taken? The bodies were never recovered. No lifeboats ever found. Whatever happened aboard the Joyita in those missing weeks remains an unanswered question, lost to the currents of time. Few artifacts frustrate scholars as profoundly as the Rohont Codex, a mysterious manuscript discovered within a private Hungarian collection in 1838. Comprising nearly 450 pages filled with a script utterly alien to linguists, the Codex presents itself as an enigma unlike any other in recorded history. Its strange characters form sentences unrecognizable by any known linguistic analysis, interwoven intricately with vivid illustrations of perplexing religious, pagan, and military scenes. Despite extensive investigation over nearly 2 centuries, the manuscript stubbornly refuses to yield its secrets. The Codex's origins are as cryptic as its contents. Early researchers suspected a clever medieval forgery, an elaborate joke or intentional hoax designed to mystify or deceive. Yet radiocarbon dating and ink analysis suggest authenticity, placing the manuscript squarely in the 15th or 16th century. Its paper carries Venetian watermarks, hinting at European origins, yet the illustrations and symbolism defy straightforward categorization, blending Christian iconography with pagan motifs in ways that challenge conventional historical narratives. Repeated attempts to decipher the Rohont Codex have consistently failed. Linguists applied sophisticated cryptographic techniques, hoping to detect hidden ciphers or obscure dialects. Experts even considered forgotten religious languages, lost dialects, or artificially constructed alphabets. Yet every analytical path led nowhere, deepening the manuscript's profound mystery. Even modern technology, utilizing artificial intelligence and advanced pattern recognition, yielded no clarity, only deeper confusion. The manuscript's illustrations further complicate interpretation. Disturbing and perplexing images portray elaborate battles, intricate religious ceremonies, and unrecognizable rituals. Some drawings depict crucifixion scenes beside unmistakably pagan rites, while others suggest unknown mythologies or secretive lost religious sects. This ambiguity fuels speculation that the Codex might be an encoded religious doctrine, a lost historical record, or perhaps the imaginative creation of a medieval eccentric whose true intentions vanished with history. Preserved in the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, the Rohont Codex remains an enigmatic monument to scholarly uncertainty to this day. Its indecipherable pages represent not just an unresolved puzzle, but a humbling reminder. Despite centuries of advancement, history occasionally presents mysteries that defy every human attempt to comprehend them, whispering quietly from a past forever hidden from view. They called it La Ciudad Blanca, the White City. In the remote jungles of Mosquitia, eastern Honduras, whispers of a lost civilization passed from one generation to the next. Local tribes told of an ancient metropolis, its buildings gleaming white under the sun, filled with treasure and cursed by the gods. Some called it the city of the monkey god, where a half-man, half-monkey deity once ruled. Others claimed it had been abandoned in fear, its people struck down by divine wrath for their excess. To Western ears, it sounded like yet another jungle myth, romantic, vivid, and almost certainly false. But the story refused to die. In the 1920s and 1930s, explorers like Theodore Maud claimed to have reached it. Maud returned from the jungle with tales of lost temples and idols, promising to reveal the location, only to die under mysterious circumstances before ever publishing his maps. His silence fed the legend, turning La Ciudad Blanca into a kind of Central American Atlantis. For decades, the jungle held its secrets. Traditional archaeological surveys were impossible in the mountainous, snake-infested terrain where thick vegetation obscured everything. Then, in 2012, a team led by filmmakers, archaeologists, and scientists employed a new kind of vision: LiDAR, light detection and ranging, a remote sensing technology that uses lasers to scan terrain through forest cover. From a small aircraft flying over the dense canopy, LiDAR returned images that defied belief. Beneath the trees were geometric shapes: plazas, pyramids, canals, mounds, and residential complexes spread across the valley floor. The jungle had buried not just a city, but an entire urban network. In 2015, ground expeditions confirmed the LiDAR data. Archaeologists found stone ceremonial seats, elaborate sculptures and artifacts left untouched for centuries. The site had likely been abandoned over 500 years ago, possibly due to disease, environmental collapse, or social upheaval. Curiously, this civilization was not Mayan. It represented a previously unknown culture, distinct from better-known Mesoamerican civilizations. Their architecture, urban planning, and iconography hinted at complex spiritual beliefs and a sophisticated society that had thrived in isolation. The jungle had reclaimed it all, as if protecting a secret too sacred or too cursed to be known. Despite the excitement, the area remains closed to large-scale excavation. Concerns about disturbing burial sites, the fragile ecological balance, and the danger of looting have kept most of the city buried, its full story still hidden beneath root and vine. But even what has been revealed is enough to confirm this. La Ciudad Blanca was real, a place of myth now traced by satellite, confirmed by foot, and carefully guarded by the jungle once again. Near the southern edge of the Dead Sea, where the air is dry and still and the ground is coated with layers of ancient salt, lie the ruins of a city violently destroyed. Charred bricks, melted pottery, human remains crushed beneath collapsed walls. For centuries, travelers have pointed to this place and asked the same question: was this Sodom? The biblical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are among the most infamous in ancient lore, cities said to have been erased by fire from the sky for their wickedness. Most viewed the story as myth, a warning wrapped in allegory. But then archaeologists began excavating Tall El Hammam, a site in modern-day Jordan, and the line between legend and reality began to blur. Excavations revealed a city once thriving, with wide streets, stone structures, and layers of occupation dating back over 3,000 years. But at a certain layer, sometime around 1650 BCE, everything changed. The buildings were shattered outward, not inward. Bricks were turned to ash. Pottery was fused with glass. The soil contained high levels of sulfur and salt. And then there were the bones, scattered, fragmented, sometimes showing signs of extreme heat and sudden trauma. What could cause such destruction? One theory stood out: an airburst. Researchers from multiple disciplines, including physics and archaeology, proposed that a meteor exploded in the sky above the city, unleashing a fireball thousands of times more powerful than Hiroshima. Temperatures may have briefly reached 2,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to vaporize metal, liquefy mud brick, and ignite everything flammable. There's historical precedent. In 1908, a similar airburst flattened 2,000 square kilometers of Siberian forest in Tunguska, Russia. The idea that such an event struck Tal El Hammam is scientifically plausible, but whether this was Sodom remains contested. There's no direct inscription calling the site by that name, no texts linking it clearly to the biblical account. Yet the geography matches, the timeline aligns, and the sudden fiery destruction echoes the story told in Genesis. Salt-covered terrain, a ruined city near the Dead Sea, and even the notion of divine punishment, it all fits. Skeptics argue that natural disasters are often absorbed into myth, and this may be just another example. Others claim the city's destruction was due to war or internal collapse, but no known weapon or siege leaves the kind of scorch marks and chemical residue found here. So we're left with ruins that don't fully explain themselves. If it was a meteor, it struck with perfect timing to give rise to one of the most enduring cautionary tales in history. If it was something else, we still don't know what. And there's a final detail. After the destruction, the region remained abandoned for hundreds of years, as if people feared to return, as if the memory lasted long after the flames had cooled. Long before the rise of emperors or samurai, before the construction of temples or the shaping of swords, there was the Jomon. For over 10,000 years, this ancient culture flourished across the islands of Japan, hunting, gathering and crafting with a sensitivity that defies their time. And among the pottery and tools they left behind, archaeologists began finding something else: small, humanoid figures, unlike anything seen before. They are called dogu. At first glance, dogu appear almost otherworldly. Most are small, just 10 to 30 centimeters tall, crafted from clay and often fired in open pits. But their shapes are what captivate. Some have wide, almond-shaped eyes that resemble goggles or visor lenses. Others have exaggerated hips, limbs, or torsos, and many appear to be wearing layered garments, belts, or armor-like plating. Some are armless, legless, or fused into one form, their purpose obscured by abstraction. Over 18,000 dogu have been discovered, spread across hundreds of sites from Hokkaido to Kyushu. The oldest may date back to 14,000 BCE, though most come from the later Jomon period, between 1000 and 400 BCE. Despite the sheer number, not a single one bears writing. Japan had no script at the time, and no direct records explain their role. Were they fertility symbols? Many depict female characteristics: broad hips, swollen bellies, pronounced breasts, but others are androgynous or even genderless. Were they used in healing rituals, broken intentionally to transfer ailments to the figure before burial? Some bear cracks that seem deliberate, suggesting ceremonial destruction. Or were they representations of spirits, gods, ancestors, or intermediaries between the human and the divine? Modern interpretations range from grounded to speculative. Some scholars see the dogu as part of a shamanic tradition, tools for spiritual journeys or rituals of transformation. Others note their anatomical oddities and speculate they may represent mythical beings or visions from altered states of consciousness. And, of course, in popular imagination, their goggle-eyed appearance has given rise to wilder theories. Visitors from the stars, ancient astronauts misunderstood as gods. But none of these ideas, scholarly or fringe, can explain the consistency and care with which dogu were made and buried. They weren't discarded. They were placed, often in ritual pits, sometimes broken first, sometimes whole, and they appear across generations and geography, suggesting a belief system both vast and deeply rooted, one that predated writing, yet expressed itself through form. Whatever the dogu were meant to represent, they watched over their world in silence, and continue to do so now, their eyes fixed on a future they would never see. In the heart of classical Athens, there once stood a place considered the very center of the city, both spiritually and geographically. It was not a palace or a fortress, but a humble-looking structure known as the Altar of the 12 Gods, mentioned in ancient texts, used in rituals, and even referenced in legal documents. This site was so central that distances across Attica were measured from its foundation. Yet today, its exact location has vanished beneath the city it once defined. The altar was established in 522 BCE during the archonship of Pisistratus the Younger, a member of Athens's powerful Pisistratid dynasty. It was dedicated to the 12 major Olympian deities: Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hermes, and either Hestia or Dionysus. While temples honoring individual gods were common, this altar served as a unifying sacred space, symbolizing the collective divine order of the cosmos. Located in the northwest corner of the Athenian Agora, the altar played a significant role in the city's civic and religious life. It functioned as a place of asylum, a refuge for those seeking protection under divine law. It was also a starting point for processions, and a reference from which all distances from Athens were measured, akin to a spiritual kilometer zero. Though referenced often in ancient sources, by Herodotus, Thucydides, and Pausanias, no large temple was ever built over it. Instead, it remained an open-air altar, accessible to all, making its loss all the more baffling. For centuries, the altar's precise location remained a matter of scholarly speculation. Then, in 1891, excavations by the German Archaeological Institute near the Eleusinion, a sanctuary to Demeter, uncovered a rectangular enclosure with inscriptions bearing dedications to the 12 gods. This modest ruin was tentatively identified as the altar, but its position raised new problems. It didn't align perfectly with classical accounts. Other scholars proposed alternate sites beneath the modern urban landscape, especially in areas inaccessible due to roads and railways. One of the leading theories today is that the altar lies beneath the modern Athens-Piraeus railway line, which cuts through the ancient agora. A small portion may have been unearthed during construction, only to be reburied or built over. Ironically, the very progress that Athens once symbolized may have erased one of its earliest and most important spiritual landmarks. Why such a foundational structure was never more permanently enshrined remains a mystery. Did its simplicity reflect humility before the gods, or was it simply intended to be accessible, more space than monument? And how did a site so central, measured, revered, and protected, become obscured by time and traffic? The altar of the 12 gods is a reminder that not all sacred places are lost to war or conquest. Some are simply paved over, buried beneath centuries of forgetfulness and stone. High above the mist-covered forests of central Sri Lanka, a lonely summit rises, Adam's Peak. At 2,243 meters above sea level, the mountain has drawn pilgrims for over 1,000 years, but they don't climb it for the view. Near the top lies a shallow depression pressed into the rock, shaped unmistakably like a human foot and far larger than any human could leave. Roughly 1.8 meters long and deeply embedded in stone, the mark is known by many names and claimed by many faiths. To Buddhists, it is the sacred footprint of the Buddha himself, made during a miraculous visit to the island. To Hindus, it belongs to Shiva, lord of the dance, who stamped his presence on the mountaintop. Christians and Muslims believe it marks the spot where Adam, the first man, set foot on earth after being cast from Eden. Each tradition tells a different story. Each one is certain. The footprint is enshrined in a small temple, protected by a roof and surrounded by bells, shrines, and offerings. For centuries, pilgrims have made the arduous journey up thousands of stone steps to pay homage, some barefoot, some chanting, some carrying candles through the pre-dawn darkness to reach the peak by sunrise. At daybreak, shadows stretch across the landscape below in the shape of a triangle, a natural phenomenon often interpreted as another sign of the mountain's divinity. But beneath the reverence lies a puzzle. Is the footprint a natural formation shaped by erosion and human imagination? Or was it carved, and if so, by whom and when? Geologists have long debated the origin of the mark. Some believe it is a naturally weathered indentation, later modified by ancient hands to emphasize its shape. Others argue it was entirely man-made, possibly during the Anuradhapura period over 1,000 years ago, when the site became a major center of pilgrimage. But no definitive dating has ever been established. The rock has no inscription, no signature, no context, just the outline of something unmistakably human, embedded in timeless stone. What gives the footprint its power isn't just its shape, it's the weight of belief layered on top of it. Different cultures, separated by faith and language, converged on the same symbol. Somehow they all saw themselves in it. The mark became a mirror. Even Marco Polo mentioned Adam's Peak in his travels, writing of a miraculous footprint high in the mountains of Ceylon. Later, European explorers speculated wildly, some calling it a relic of a giant race, others dismissing it as clever fakery. But no one left indifferent. To this day, the pilgrimage continues. By torchlight, families and strangers climb together. The journey is long, the air grows thin, and the body tires. But when the summit is reached and the footprint appears beneath a haze of incense and sunrise, the silence says more than any scripture. Still, for all its spiritual gravity, the footprint remains physically unexplained. And it raises a deeper question. What else might the ancient world have left behind, hidden not in plain sight but deliberately sealed away? In the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, where writing, kingship, and recorded history began, archaeologists uncovered a text so strange it blurred the boundary between chronicle and legend. Known today as the Sumerian King List, this artifact doesn't merely document rulers and cities, it describes kings who reigned for hundreds, even tens of thousands of years, across epochs that stretch far beyond what history allows. And yet, this list is real, carved into clay, copied across centuries, and taken seriously by the civilizations that followed. The most complete version of the list was found in the early 20th century at Lhasa, inscribed on a clay prism, now housed in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. Other fragments have surfaced in Nippur, Ur, and Kish, all ancient Sumerian city-states. Though details vary, the list always follows the same structure, a linear sequence of kings grouped by dynasties and cities, beginning with a stark proclamation. After kingship had descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. From there, it proceeds to list the earliest rulers, some with reign lengths of 28,800 years, 36,000 years, even 43,200 years. These are the so-called antediluvian kings, those who ruled before a great flood, reminiscent of biblical and Near Eastern flood myths. After the flood, the reign lengths shrink to more plausible durations, but still often extend to several centuries. Historians agree the Sumerian king list is not a simple record of real events. It's a blend of myth, political ideology, and selective memory. Some of the later kings mentioned, like Gilgamesh of Uruk, appear in other historical texts and are considered semi-legendary figures. Others are fully historical, confirmed through independent inscriptions and archaeological evidence. So why exaggerate the early reigns so drastically? One theory holds that the antediluvian kings represent archetypal rulers, mythical founders whose impossibly long lives symbolized a golden age of divine order. By anchoring real dynasties to these mythic origins, later Sumerian rulers could legitimize their own authority, tracing power directly to divine will. In this way, the king list functioned not just as history, but as propaganda. Another interpretation suggests the list was part of a sacred cosmology. The Sumerians may have viewed time in cycles, with periods of divine rule giving way to human leadership, separated by cataclysmic events like the flood. The absurd reign lengths then were not meant to be taken literally, but ritually, as markers of cosmic ages. Still, others have proposed that the list preserves distorted memories of prehistoric leaders, oral traditions passed down for millennia before writing emerged. Could these ancient names represent real chieftains or tribal figures whose deeds became exaggerated over time? Regardless of interpretation, what's remarkable is how widely copied and respected the list was. Later cultures, including the Babylonians and Assyrians, maintained versions of the king list and adapted its themes into their own literature. The very idea of divine kingship descending from heaven would echo for centuries across the Near East. Today, the Sumerian king list stands as a reminder that the ancients didn't separate myth and history the way we do. For them, memory was fluid, and the purpose of the past was not merely to inform, but to give meaning to the present. It's a document that records time but warps it, catalogues rulers but mystifies them, preserves history but cloaks it in wonder. Beneath the cold, high-altitude waters of Lake Titicaca, stone structures rest in silence. Temples, platforms, and carved roads submerged under sediment and time. In 2000, a Bolivian-Italian archaeological expedition used sonar and diving equipment to investigate local legends of a city beneath the lake. What they found was startling: ruins stretching over a kilometer, with platforms and walls laid with precise masonry. Some stones weighing several tons. Had a sacred complex once stood here, now lost to rising water. Lake Titicaca, straddling the border of Bolivia and Peru, is the highest navigable lake in the world, sitting at an altitude of 3,812 meters. It was sacred to both the Tiwanaku civilization and later the Inca Empire, who believed the sun itself rose from its waters. But the structures discovered beneath its surface appear to predate both cultures. Pottery fragments and radiocarbon dating suggest they may be over 1,000 years old, possibly older. Built before Tiwanaku reached its height around 500 to 1000 CE. Who were the builders, and why did they choose this place? The site, near the village of Sampaya, includes what may have been a ceremonial platform, a long stone road, and rectangular enclosures. Some researchers believe the area could be part of a much larger complex, a sacred center that was later swallowed by the lake as its water levels rose. Were these people forced to abandon their city? Or did the flooding happen slowly, generation by generation, until memory itself was drowned? Local Aymara communities have long spoken of an underwater city, Wanaku, linked to ancient myths of the lake's origins. For centuries, these tales were dismissed as folklore, but with sonar readings and underwater photography confirming the presence of man-made structures, those stories now seem less like myth and more like memory. How often has archaeology caught up to what legend already knew? Unlike the well-studied ruins of Tiwanaku or Machu Picchu, this submerged site remains largely unexcavated. The logistics of underwater archaeology at high altitude are difficult, and the lake itself resists exploration. Its temperature icy, its visibility poor, yet questions continue to surface. Why would such a monumental site be built so close to water's edge? Was it meant to be seen by the gods, reflected in the sky above and the lake below? So far, no inscriptions have been found, no names, no royal tombs or dedications, only stones carefully placed, now hidden beneath the ripples. The architecture suggests cultural continuity with Tiwanaku, but its builders left no written legacy. Their city, if it was one, is without a voice. Who they were, how they lived, and what brought them to this sacred shore remain unanswered. A lost temple beneath a sacred lake, roads that lead into water, legends that turned out to be real, and yet without a single word from the past, we're left wondering, did this place fall to nature, or was it meant to disappear? The jungle had kept its secret for centuries. Hidden among the Andean ridges, Machu Picchu stood wrapped in cloud and stone, untouched by conquest and unknown to the outside world. It wasn't until 1911, when Yale professor Hiram Bingham followed local guides into the mountains of Peru, that the world began to learn of the city in the sky and the carved monolith that lay at its heart, the Intihuatana stone. It rises from the mountain itself, hewn from bedrock with geometric precision. The base block is broad and angular, its planes aligned with the cardinal points. From it juts a short vertical spike, chiseled, not sculpted, measuring just under 1 meter in height. The surface is weathered but unbroken. Its edges are crisp, its corners deliberate. Pale grey in color, the stone glows white under midday sun and shifts to silver in the thin mountain mist. From a distance it appears understated. Up close it becomes undeniable. The name Intihuatana, meaning hitching post of the sun in Quechua, was not given by the Inca, but by later scholars trying to interpret its role. Yet the term captures something of its purpose. On the equinoxes the sun stands directly overhead, casting no shadow from the central pillar, an optical stillness that ancient priests may have used to mark balance in the solar calendar. At sunrise and sunset during solstices, the stone aligns with the surrounding peaks, particularly Huayna Picchu and Salcantay, echoing celestial events in stone geometry. But the Intihuatana was more than a solar tool. Its placement at the highest ceremonial platform suggests spiritual importance beyond astronomy. Nearby lie the Temple of the Sun, ritual baths, and finely worked shrines, each arranged as part of a cosmological design. The stone may have served as a conduit for sacred rites, anchoring time and space, connecting the heavens to the Inca state's divine mandate. No inscriptions remain, but its form alone implies deep symbolic intent. Locals in the region had long known of Machu Picchu's existence. Quechua families grazed livestock along the terraces. To them, the site was not a lost city, it was a sacred space hidden from conquest. Oral tradition held that powerful stones remained there, left untouched by Spanish hands. When Bingham arrived, he did not discover Machu Picchu, but reintroduced it to the world outside Peru. The Intihuatana, unlike others destroyed by colonial forces, had survived because of the mountain's isolation. Modern visitors often speak of a strange calm surrounding the stone. Some say compasses waver near its base. Others describe a hum in the air, a silence that deepens rather than empties. The surrounding platform, cut into terraces and stepped walls, frames the sky like a ritual theater. The view is vast. Cloud forests unfolding in every direction, peaks wrapped in mist, the valley yawning below like a forgotten axis. In 2000, a crane fell during the filming of a commercial at Machu Picchu, chipping the Intihuatana's upper edge. The damage, though repaired, provoked outrage. It was not just a scar on stone, it was a violation of something far older than concrete or camera. Today, archaeologists and archaeoastronomers continue to study the site using solar simulations and GPS-based surveys. The stone's angles and alignments hint at knowledge more advanced than previously assumed, yet its purpose resists full classification. It is not a sundial in the modern sense. It is not a mere monument. It stands somewhere between function and ritual, science and spirit. To this day, the Intihuatana remains one of the few Inca ritual stones left in situ, untouched in its original position. It speaks not through language or symbol, but through form, carved meaning held in silence. Some disappearances defy all logic, but few are as bizarre and unsettling as the case of El Fausto, a small fishing boat that vanished twice, leaving behind only eerie fragments of its final journey. Unlike other ghost ship stories, this wasn't a vessel lost in a storm or swallowed by the sea. It returned, but without its crew, without explanation, and with details that only deepened the mystery. El Fausto was a 13-meter-long wooden fishing boat, operated by 3 brothers, Ramon, Miguel, and Julio Umpierres, along with a passenger named Manuel Fuentes. On July 20th, 1968, they left the small island of La Palma, part of Spain's Canary Islands, on a routine supply run to El Hierro about 100 kilometers away. It was a short trip, and the boat arrived as planned. After delivering goods, they prepared to return. Then, at the last moment, Fuentes, who hadn't planned to stay aboard, decided to join them for the return trip. That decision sealed their fate. Hours later, El Fausto never arrived. It was a clear day, with calm seas and no bad weather. A full-scale search began, combing the waters between the islands. Days passed. Nothing. The boat, its crew, and the unexpected passenger were simply gone. 8 days later, the impossible happened. A cargo ship, Duquesa, spotted El Fausto adrift 1,500 kilometers away, far beyond its intended route. The ship pulled alongside and saw the 3 brothers on deck waving for help, but something was wrong. The men looked terrified, as if they had seen something they couldn't explain. The Duquesa's crew threw them a rope, but before they could board, a massive wave pushed El Fausto away. The fishing boat drifted into the distance, refusing to be rescued. The crew of the Duquesa watched, helpless, as the vessel disappeared again, this time for good. Weeks later, El Fausto was found one last time, This time abandoned. It had drifted over 3,200 kilometers into the Atlantic near Venezuela. There was no sign of the crew, only an eerie silence. Inside, investigators found a notebook. The last entry read, "There is nothing, we are dying." The words sent chills through those who read them. They were brief, final, and offered no explanation. There were no signs of struggle, no damage, no clear cause for their disappearance. Had the men suffered from dehydration and madness, abandoning the ship into the unforgiving ocean? If so, why did they refuse rescue when it was within reach? Some believe they were chased by something they could not escape. Others suggest they saw something they were never meant to see. The most unsettling possibility is that the crew knew they were doomed long before the end came, but left no explanation as to why. To this day, not a single body was ever recovered. The sea had swallowed them, leaving behind only their ship, an unanswered message, and a mystery that refuses to fade. History occasionally reveals artifacts so perplexing they seem to defy the very timeline of civilization itself. One extraordinary example emerged near the Austrian village of Wolfsegg am Hausruck in 1885, when coal miners discovered a perfectly formed iron cube embedded deep within coal estimated to be around 20 million years old. Meticulously shaped, the artifact measured roughly 7 centimeters per side, displaying precise edges and symmetrical surfaces, features clearly indicating human craftsmanship, yet impossibly ancient given its geological context. The discovery sparked immediate controversy. How could such an object exist within coal-formed eons before humans walked the Earth? Scientists and historians quickly lined up on opposing sides, debating its origins vigorously. Metallurgical tests confirmed the object was indeed refined iron, fashioned with care and technical sophistication. Such precision ruled out natural formation, challenging geologists and archaeologists to explain its presence within a coal seam millions of years old. Various theories emerged, each attempting to rationalize the cube's impossible placement. Some argued that it was simply industrial debris accidentally introduced during mining operations, while others proposed more unconventional ideas, ranging from forgotten advanced prehistoric civilizations to even extraterrestrial influence. Yet no theory satisfactorily resolved the fundamental mystery: how a clearly artificial artifact ended up embedded in geological layers from a distant past when no known human civilization existed. Adding further intrigue, the cube was initially exhibited in the Linz Museum, generating considerable public curiosity before quietly disappearing from display into private ownership. Its brief exposure to public scrutiny only deepened the controversy, prompting speculation that deliberate concealment was involved, either to prevent embarrassment to scientific institutions or to suppress inconvenient historical anomalies. Still held privately away from public scrutiny, the Wolfsegg iron remains a provocative symbol of historical uncertainty. Its very existence challenges conventional scientific timelines, prompting questions historians hesitate to confront directly. Whether authentic ancient anomaly, elaborate modern forgery, or misunderstood geological phenomenon, the cube endures as a testament to history's enduring ability to confound human understanding, quietly reminding scholars of the mysteries that still lurk within the depths of our world's past. In the ancient world, few marvels stirred the imagination like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Described as an oasis suspended in the sky, the gardens were said to defy gravity and climate alike, terraced layers of exotic trees, flowering vines, and rushing water rising like a green mountain in the desert. Greek historians such as Strabo, Philo of Byzantium, and Diodorus Siculus praised the gardens as one of the 7 wonders of the world, a man-made Eden said to soothe the homesickness of a queen. But despite their fame, one glaring mystery persisted for centuries. No trace of the gardens has ever been found in Babylon. Excavations in the ancient city, located near modern Hillah, Iraq, uncovered temples, ziggurats, walls, and palaces built under Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BCE, the king most often credited with creating the gardens. But not a single artifact, inscription, or ruin confirmed their existence. How could one of the greatest wonders of antiquity leave no archaeological footprint? Some dismissed the gardens as poetic fantasy. Others proposed that they had been destroyed without a trace. But a bolder theory took shape in the late 20th century. What if the historians simply got the city wrong? While studying Assyrian cuneiform inscriptions, researcher Dr. Stephanie Daly of Oxford University noticed that another ancient king, Sennacherib of Assyria, described in vivid detail the construction of a grand palace complex in Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. Over a century before Nebuchadnezzar's reign, in his writings, Sennacherib claimed to have created a wonder for all people, complete with lush gardens, exotic plants, and revolutionary waterworks. Unlike Babylon, Nineveh, located near modern-day Mosul, yielded archaeological proof. Excavations revealed the remains of vast aqueducts, canals, and water screws, possibly early versions of the Archimedean screw, designed to elevate water from the Tigris River to irrigate higher ground. The engineering described in Sennacherib's own inscriptions matched the feats attributed to the Hanging Gardens with uncanny precision. The misattribution may have been a result of ancient confusion. Greek historians, writing centuries after both cities had fallen, may have conflated tales of Babylon's grandeur with the marvels of Nineveh. Babylon was the more famous city, and its reputation may have absorbed the legend whole. If Dr. Daly's theory is correct, the Hanging Gardens did exist, not as fantasy, but as an engineering masterpiece in the wrong city. Built in the 7th century BCE, they would have represented not only an aesthetic triumph, but a technological one. Bringing flowing water uphill through bronze channels and carved canals in an arid region required knowledge far ahead of its time. This theory has gained support, but debate continues. Some scholars still insist the gardens were in Babylon, now lost beneath riverbeds or modern development. Others argue the myth was always metaphorical, but the idea that such a wonder could be misplaced in history, hidden not by destruction but by misremembering, is perhaps more haunting than if it had been lost entirely. It suggests that legends don't just fade. They shift, carried by the winds of time, sometimes landing where no one thought to look. In 1999, two treasure hunters climbed the Mittelberg Hill in Saxony-Anhalt, Germany, with illegal metal detectors and shovels. What they uncovered was something they didn't understand. A bronze disc, about 30 centimeters across, corroded but still intact with strange golden shapes embedded on its surface. A sun or full moon, a crescent, a cluster of 7 stars, arcs, lines, not decoration, arrangement. They tried to sell it. Authorities intervened, and once archaeologists examined it, they realized what it was: the oldest known concrete depiction of the cosmos in human history. The Nebra sky disk, as it came to be called, was dated to around 1600 BCE, placing it in the European Bronze Age, far earlier than any known celestial chart from the region. It was buried alongside swords, axes, and bracelets, suggesting it held ritual or symbolic importance. But what struck scholars most was the precision of the golden inlays. The disk appears to show the Pleiades star cluster, a key seasonal marker for early agricultural societies. One arc matches the sun's path at the summer and winter solstices, exactly where it rises and sets on the horizon from the hill where the disk was found. Another arc, later added, may show the lunar cycle or relate to timekeeping. This wasn't abstract art. It was a functional astronomical tool, embedded in bronze, made by people previously assumed to lack such knowledge. The surrounding area revealed more: a circular enclosure, perhaps a solar observatory, and remnants of ritual activity. Whoever made the disk understood the skies, and encoded that understanding in a form built to last. But here's the mystery: how did they know? No written records exist from Central Europe at the time. The cultures of the region, often called part of the Unitis culture, left behind tools, weapons, and graves, but no signs of astronomy, mathematics, or symbolic systems. The disk appears in isolation, without a lineage or predecessor. Was it the product of local knowledge passed orally? Or did ideas travel across trade routes over generations from more developed societies in Mesopotamia or Egypt? There's no evidence either way. The disk went through at least 3 distinct phases of modification: symbols added, moved, even partially erased. That suggests it was used over time, adapted to changing beliefs or needs. But its ultimate purpose, was it a teaching device, a ceremonial object, a calendar, remains uncertain. It now rests in a climate-controlled exhibit in Germany, its once-buried surface polished and lit. People come to see it not because it's beautiful, but because it shouldn't exist. Not there, not then. The stars are still above us, unchanged. But what this disk shows is that even in the distant past, someone was watching. And not just watching, measuring, mapping, recording. It was found not by archaeologists, but by chance, and then hidden for decades. In 1933, during the Japanese occupation of northeastern China, a laborer working on a bridge near Harbin unearthed a human skull buried in the sediment along the Songhua River. Fearing confiscation, he wrapped it up and concealed it in an abandoned well. It stayed there, forgotten, for over 80 years. Only in 2018 did the skull resurface, when the man's family handed it to Chinese scientists. What they held was astonishing. A massive, nearly intact human cranium, dark and fossilized, with features both familiar and alien. The skull was larger than any modern humans, with a low brow, wide eye sockets, and a thick, robust structure. Yet its brain volume matched ours, and the face was surprisingly delicate, flat, with large cheekbones and a broad nose. It didn't fit into any known category. Dated to at least 146,000 years ago, the fossil was dubbed Homo longi, or Dragon Man. Some researchers propose that it represented not just a new species, but one potentially closer to modern humans than even the Neanderthals. Others argued it might be a Denisovan, another mysterious cousin in the human family, known mostly through DNA rather than bones. But the truth is, no one knows for sure. The Dragon Man doesn't quite fit anywhere. Its discovery has sparked fierce debate about our evolutionary tree. For decades, human origins were understood through a fairly linear model. Homo erectus gave rise to various offshoots like Neanderthals, who eventually faded as Homo sapiens spread across the globe. But fossils like Dragon Man challenge that simplicity. They suggest a world where multiple intelligent human species lived side by side, competing, interbreeding, coexisting, or disappearing without a trace. And what makes the Dragon Man so haunting is not just what it tells us about the past, but what it suggests we still don't know. If this skull remained hidden for nearly a century and undiscovered for 140,000 years, how many others lie buried beneath silt, bone, and time? How many branches of our family tree have yet to be found? The Dragon Man is not myth or rumor. It's bone and silence. A face from a forgotten lineage staring forward with no voice, no artifacts, no culture left behind. Just a skull, impossibly old, impossibly human, and possibly something else entirely. Amid the dry expanse of the Al Ain Oasis in the United Arab Emirates, a structure rises from the desert, circular and immense. Built from massive stone blocks and decorated with faint carvings of human and animal figures, the hilly Grand Tomb stands as one of the most imposing prehistoric monuments in the Arabian Peninsula. And yet, no written record, no known name, no preserved voice tells us who built it or why. Constructed during the early Bronze Age, around 2500 BCE, the tomb is part of the larger Hilli Archaeological Park, a complex of settlements, towers, and burial structures that once formed the heart of the Umanna culture. This ancient society flourished in southeastern Arabia, trading copper, stone, and goods with Mesopotamia, Iran, and the Indus Valley. But while we know their trade routes and the reach of their influence, we know almost nothing about their beliefs, social structures, or language. The tomb itself is remarkable in size and engineering. It measures about 12 meters in diameter and stands over 4 meters tall, made of ashlar masonry, large, precisely cut stones fitted together without mortar. Its internal chambers are arranged to house multiple individuals, suggesting communal or elite burials. The exterior once bore carved reliefs of ibexes, oryxes, and human figures, hinting at symbolic meaning, but their interpretation remains uncertain. Unlike Egyptian tombs of the same era, which are dense with hieroglyphs and funerary texts, the Hilli Grand Tomb is silent. No inscriptions, no murals, no grave goods elaborate enough to explain its occupants' roles. Even skeletal remains found inside have yielded limited clues. Were they leaders, priests, ancestors worshipped through generations? The scale and sophistication of the tomb suggest a society with strong social organization and complex spiritual beliefs. Its central placement within the Hilli settlement implies ritual importance, perhaps serving as both a funerary site and a ceremonial focal point. But without texts or myths, all theories remain speculative. Some archaeologists believe the tomb was part of a broader cult of the dead, reflecting shared memory across extended families or clans. Others see it as a political marker, a monument asserting control over land, water, or trade routes. A few go further, proposing that the Hilli complex hints at a now-lost cultural ideology that once unified the region before being overtaken by changing climates, migrations, and new powers. Today, the Hilli Grand Tomb has been restored and protected, yet it remains enigmatic. It is the work of a people who understood the land, shaped stone with precision, and honored their dead, but who left behind no lasting voice, only architecture. Scattered across the islands of Japan lie some of the largest and least understood burial structures in the world. From above, they appear unmistakable, colossal mounds shaped like keyholes, with rounded fronts and squared backs, surrounded by moats and often guarded by thick forests. They are the Kofun, imperial tombs built between the 3rd and 7th centuries CE, and though they've watched over the landscape for more than 1,000 years, their contents remain a tightly held secret. Some of these tombs rival the Egyptian pyramids in scale. The Daisen Kofun, believed to be the final resting place of Emperor Nintoku, measures over 480 meters in length, longer than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Others are smaller, but still imposing, clustered across the Kansai region and beyond. Together, they form a landscape of death and memory on a scale unmatched in early Japanese history. What lies inside them? We don't know. Because for more than a century, the Japanese Imperial Household Agency has forbidden any full-scale archaeological excavation of the keyhole tombs believed to belong to emperors or royal family members. The reason given: to preserve the sanctity of the imperial ancestors. These are not historical sites to be studied. They are sacred spaces, inviolable. A few kofun that are not designated imperial or are considered lower status have been partially explored. Inside, archaeologists have found clay figures called haniwa, bronze mirrors, weapons, armor, and decorative items, hinting at the complex rituals surrounding death and power during the Kofun period. Some tombs have inner chambers lined with massive stones and painted walls, but even these raise more questions than they answer. The forbidden Kofun, however, remain sealed. No one knows what kind of treasures or texts, or even human remains, might lie within. Could they contain evidence of ancient political alliances, religious transitions, or even foreign influences? Could they rewrite parts of Japanese history? We don't know, and we may never know. The tension between archaeology and reverence is not new, but here, it has created a wall no excavation can breach. Japanese scholars must walk a careful line, respecting tradition while still yearning to uncover the deeper truths of their past. A few have called for limited access using modern, non-invasive technology, ground-penetrating radar, remote sensors, but even these efforts face resistance. To outsiders, the refusal can seem frustrating, but to many in Japan it reflects something older and deeper, the belief that some knowledge is not meant to be disturbed, that certain doors once sealed should remain so. And so the tombs sit, vast and quiet, blending into the forests around them. Keyholes to secrets we're not allowed to unlock, monuments to power, and silence. Long before the pharaohs built their pyramids, before Sumerian scribes etched cuneiform into clay, a group of people on the shores of the Black Sea buried their dead with gold. Not a few ornaments, but hundreds of meticulously crafted objects: necklaces, scepters, diadems, and beads. In 1972, while excavating a construction site near Varna, Bulgaria, archaeologists made a discovery that would rewrite the origins of European civilization, the Varna necropolis. Within this ancient burial ground, dated to around 4,600–4,500 BCE, researchers uncovered over 3,000 gold artifacts, weighing more than 6 kilograms in total. It is, to this day, the oldest known processed gold in the world. The craftsmanship is staggering. Thin gold sheets, spiral bracelets, bull symbol amulets, and intricately incised discs, all created more than 1,000 years before the rise of Mesopotamia's first cities. But the gold is only part of the mystery. The graves themselves tell a story of unequal wealth and complex hierarchy. Of the 294 burials uncovered at Varna, some contain little more than a skeleton. Others, like Grave 43, are astonishing. There, a male individual was interred with over 1,000 gold objects, weapons made of copper, finely polished stone tools, and ornate pottery. His bones suggest he was muscular, likely a leader or warrior, but the opulence surrounding him indicates something more. A stratified society, one that had developed a concept of elite status, ceremony, and wealth long before most textbooks would allow. And yet, this society left no written records. We don't know what language they spoke, what gods they worshipped, or what political system governed them. But they traded widely. Beads made of Mediterranean shells and obsidian from distant regions were found in the graves, proof of long-distance exchange networks stretching across prehistoric Europe. The Varna culture, as it's now known, flourished at the dawn of the Chalcolithic, Copper Age, when metallurgy was just beginning to emerge. These people were among the first in Europe to smelt copper, create gold ornaments, and bury their dead with symbols of power and identity. Yet within a few centuries the culture disappeared. No great cities rose, no monumental temples stood. All that remains is what they left in the ground. And that perhaps is the greatest enigma. Why did such a technologically advanced and socially complex culture vanish without a trace? Was it climate change, internal conflict, or invasion by less ornate but more organized neighbors? No one knows. Today, the artifacts from the Varna necropolis are housed in museums, but they raise more questions than they answer. How did these early people learn to work gold with such precision? Why were only certain individuals buried with such riches? And why, despite their achievements, were they forgotten for nearly 7,000 years? The Varna gold treasure reminds us that history is not a steady march from simple to complex. Sometimes the peaks come early and vanish quickly, buried beneath layers of time, waiting to be unearthed. Scattered across the remote Altiplano near Bolivia's towering Mount Sajama, hundreds of stone towers rise in silence. These are chulpas, ancient burial monuments reaching up to 5 meters high, cylindrical or square, and often carefully constructed with mortarless masonry. Their placement seems deliberate, dotting the landscape like sentinels of the past. Some stand alone, others cluster together, but all face the rising sun. The region surrounding Sajama has been inhabited for millennia. The Lukamata site to the north dates back as far as 200 BCE, while Tiwanaku's influence spread through the Andes by 500 CE. Yet the chulpas near Sajama don't match the ceremonial architecture of Tiwanaku, nor do they align with the Inca style that followed. Instead, they hint at a lesser-known culture, organized, capable, and deeply invested in honoring their dead. Who were these people, and why did they build their tombs so high, so exposed? The structures themselves show impressive engineering. Built from volcanic stone or adobe, the towers were sometimes covered with plaster and painted in red or white, traces of which still survive in a few protected sites. Inside, bodies were placed in fetal position alongside grave goods, textiles, ceramics, and offerings, suggesting a belief in continuity beyond death. But there are no inscriptions, no names, no known oral traditions that link directly to these tombs. Why would a culture so invested in its dead leave behind no record of the living? Most chulpas are oriented eastward, toward the sunrise, implying cosmological beliefs rooted in rebirth or resurrection. Were they built to catch the first light of day, to awaken the ancestors? Or did they serve as markers, mapping celestial alignments or territorial claims in the high-altitude plains? Spanish chroniclers in the 16th century documented similar towers farther north, often describing them as idolatrous or pagan. Many were looted or destroyed. Near Sajama, the remote location preserved them longer, but even here weather and neglect have taken their toll. Some have collapsed. Others stand partially eroded, their stone skins flaking under wind and time. How many more were lost before they could be studied? The cultural identity of the builders remains uncertain. They may have been related to the Pacajes, a powerful Aymara-speaking kingdom that rose after Tiwanaku's decline, or to an earlier undocumented people whose legacy survives only in stone. No written records remain. No language has yet been tied conclusively to the chulpas' creators. And so they stand, isolated, unspeaking, but stubbornly present. Markers of a civilization that measured permanence not in cities, but in tombs. What kind of society builds such enduring monuments for the dead and leaves no stories for the living? Beneath the dusty plains of central Turkey, a low, unassuming mound rises from the Konya Plain. For centuries, it was dismissed as just another hill, but beginning in the 1950s, archaeologist James Mellart led excavations that peeled back the layers of time at Çatalhöyük, revealing an ancient settlement that redefined the story of early human civilization. Densely packed mud brick homes formed a city with no streets, no temples, and no visible hierarchy. Yet its people painted murals, buried their dead beneath floors, and filled their rooms with symbolic objects crafted by hand. In 1961, within the fill of a collapsed domestic structure, a broken figurine was recovered from near a storage alcove, covered gently by refuse, but unmistakably intentional in its placement. Just 17 centimeters tall, the seated woman of Çatalhöyük is shaped from baked clay and fired to a warm reddish hue. She sits with poise on a throne flanked by two leopards or panthers, powerful creatures rendered with muscular haunches and open jaws. Her form is broad, rounded, and confident. She wears no crown, carries no tool, and speaks with no inscription, yet she projects the calm authority of something revered. Unlike many Neolithic female figurines that are abstract or symbolic, she is composed with balance, grounded in gesture as if observing more than ruling. This was not the only figurine found at Çatalhöyük. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of clay figures, mostly fragmented, often female, many depicting pregnancy or exaggerated fertility, but most are small, palm-sized, and lack the formal throne or animal attendants that define this piece. In that, she stands apart. She is singular not in presence alone, but in intention. Originally interpreted by Melart and others as a mother goddess, the figure was believed to reflect a matriarchal or fertility-based religion. But in recent decades, scholars have stepped back from that conclusion. There is no central temple at Çatalhöyük, no altar where such figures were enshrined. Many were found discarded in refuse pits or casually placed in storage areas, not shrines. Some now argue that the figurines represent ancestors, protective spirits, or communal ideals, personal rather than divine, symbolic rather than worshipped. The seated woman's fine spot suggests deliberate concealment, possibly a retirement or deposition rather than active use. She was broken in several places. Whether intentionally or by collapse remains unclear, but her symbolism is difficult to dismiss. The throne, the leopards, the upright posture, these are markers of formal power, not domestic routine. Çatalhöyük itself complicates every theory. The settlement lasted over a millennium, and throughout its layers, no signs of kings, warriors, or class divisions emerge. Homes are roughly equal in size and contents. Burials cross age, sex, and status lines. Yet into this flat social landscape, someone shaped and placed a woman on a throne. Today, the site of Çatalhöyük is protected by a weathered roof of steel and canvas. Pathways wind between open excavation pits, and visitors walk past mud brick walls shaped by hands that predate writing by thousands of years. The figurine, now carefully preserved and displayed at the Museum of Anatolian Civilizations in Ankara, no longer rests in the shadows of grain bins and hearths. It sits beneath glass, still poised, still silent. No name is known for her. No script survives from her world, but she remains one of the oldest sculpted symbols of power, expression, and intention humanity has ever left behind. And so the trail grows deeper. What began as scattered mysteries now feels like fragments of a much larger, hidden truth, one that stretches beyond borders, beyond timelines, and perhaps beyond what we're ready to understand. But this is far from over. There are still unanswered riddles, unexplored ruins, and artifacts waiting to be found. If you've made it this far, you already know. History doesn't end, it just waits. So stay curious, stay watching. And if you haven't already, subscribe, share the story, and explore the other mysteries waiting on this channel. Because the past is not done with us yet.